She didn't scream. She didn't throw the box across the room. She didn't give them a single tear to feed on. Imani Whitaker Kwon sat at the head of that diamond-lit dining table, her family's table, the one she had smiled across for 3 years. And she looked down at a cheap polyester cleaning uniform folded inside a birthday gift box, while 23 people laughed at her. 23 people. Relatives who had kissed her cheeks at weddings, who had eaten food she ordered, who had smiled in the Christmas photographs she arranged. And not one of them stopped laughing, long enough to notice the door behind them was slightly open. Not one of them saw the man standing in the shadows of that hallway. Not one of them knew that the most dangerous person in that room wasn't the crime boss they feared. It was his wife, and she had been quiet for far too long. If this were you, if you sat at that table and watched them celebrate your humiliation, what would you have done? This channel is where stories like this live. Real emotions, real consequences, stories that make you feel something. Subscribe right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next, because these stories only get more intense from here. Hit the like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning of her 32nd birthday, Imani woke up before her alarm. That wasn't unusual. She had always been an early riser. Her grandmother used to say it was because she was born at 5 in the morning and never quite forgave the world for starting without her. Imani would smile at that whenever she remembered it. She missed her grandmother. She missed a lot of things that used to be simple. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of the city 22 floors below. Manhattan at 6 in the morning had a particular kind of hum, not quiet, never quiet, but lower, like the city was warming up instead of running. She had fallen in love with that sound in her 20s when she first moved here. She still loved it, even though everything else about her life had changed so completely that the girl who first heard it would barely recognize the woman lying here now. Jae-min's side of the bed was cold. That was also not unusual. He was already awake and already somewhere else. She had learned to track his absence by the specific temperature of the sheets. Barely cold meant he had left within the hour. Completely cold meant he had never come to bed at all. This morning they were somewhere in the middle, which meant he had slept for a few hours and then left before dawn without waking her. He always did that. He moved through the apartment like someone who had spent years learning to exist without disturbing the air around him. She found the note on his pillow. He always left notes when he left early. That was one of the first things she had learned about Jae-min Kwon, that beneath every layer of discipline and silence and controlled danger, he was, quietly, a man who left notes. Happy birthday. Don't rush this morning. I made arrangements. She read it twice. She didn't know what arrangements meant with Jae-min. It could mean anything from a car waiting downstairs to a country she'd never visited. But she folded the note carefully and placed it in the drawer of her nightstand where she kept the others. She had 37 of them now. She'd counted once, on a night when she needed to remind herself of the man she had actually married rather than the one his family tried to describe to her. She took her time getting ready. She did her own hair, the way she always did, and she chose a dress she loved, deep burgundy, fitted, the kind of dress that made her feel like herself, rather than like someone performing a role. She spent an extra few minutes on her earrings. Her mother had given them to her years ago, gold with small amber stones, and she wore them on days when she needed to feel armored without anyone knowing she felt that way. By 10 o'clock, she was having coffee alone in the kitchen, watching the city wake up fully below her, and she was allowing herself the specific pleasure of not thinking about dinner. She did not particularly want to go to dinner. She had not said this to Jae-min. She would not say it. The dinner was at his mother's estate in Westchester, and Sun-hee Kwon had been the one to organize it. And Imani understood by now that declining an invitation from Sun-hee was not simply a social choice. It was a declaration of war, and Imani had spent 3 years carefully, methodically, exhaustingly avoiding war. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister-in-law, Yuna. We're all so excited for tonight. Can't wait to celebrate you properly. Imani read it twice the same way she'd read Jae-min's note. The difference was that she didn't fold this one carefully. She set her phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. There was something wrong with the text. Not in the words themselves, but in the feeling beneath them, the specific warmth of it, the enthusiasm. Yuna Kwon did not do enthusiasm. Not for Imani. In 3 years, Yuna had mastered the art of the almost compliment, the statement that sounded generous on the surface, but carried something small and sharp underneath, something you only felt later, when the conversation was over, and you were alone, and you were pressing your fingers against your arm trying to locate the source of the sting. Imani told herself she was being paranoid. She picked up her phone and texted back, looking forward to it. She was not looking forward to it. The drive to Westchester took 40 minutes. Jae-min's driver, a quiet Korean man named Mr. Park, who had been with the family for 15 years, and who communicated primarily through specific arrangements of silence, picked her up at 3, and they did not speak for most of the ride. This suited Imani perfectly. She watched the city thin out and the trees thicken, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had developed out of necessity. Thinking about particular things too much got her into trouble, particularly things like whether she belonged in this life. She had asked Jae-min that question once, very early in their marriage, not in those exact words, but close enough. They had been at some event, she couldn't remember which one now. They all blurred together, and someone had said something to her, some relative, some associate, something just a shade, too pointed. And when they got home that night, she had sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Do you think this was a mistake?" He had looked at her for a long moment, not the calculating look he gave when he was managing a situation. The other look, the one he reserved for moments when he was actually present, when the weight he carried was momentarily set down. "Which part?" he said. "Any of it, all of it. Me and you and all of this." He had sat down beside her. He had not touched her hand or tried to fix the feeling. He had just sat with her in it for a moment, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which she had not expected from a man with his reputation. "No," he said finally. Not for 1 second. She had believed him. She still believed him. What she was less certain about was whether belief was enough to sustain something, when everything surrounding it was working to undo it. Mr. Park pulled through the gates of the Kwon estate at 3:45. Imani straightened in her seat. She put her shoulders back. She did the small private ritual she always did before entering this house, not prayer, exactly, more like a recalibration. A reminder that she knew who she was and that this house did not get to change that. She stepped out of the car into the cool October air. The estate was objectively extraordinary. Imani had grown up in Atlanta, in a house where the hot water heater was unreliable, and the carpet in the hallway had a soft spot that everyone who lived there learned to avoid without thinking. She did not come from money. She had built her own modest security as a textile designer with a small but devoted client base. She had been proud of that, the kind of proud that sits quietly in your chest rather than announcing itself. When she married Jae-min, the scale of his wealth had taken her breath away in the literal sense. She had sometimes stood in rooms of this estate, feeling slightly dizzy, the way you feel at altitude. 3 years later, the grandeur no longer made her dizzy. It just made her aware of how thoroughly she was meant to feel that she didn't belong in it. Sun-hee had decorated for the occasion. That should have been a good sign. Crystal everywhere, catching the afternoon light. Fresh flowers on every surface, white and gold, the kind of arrangement that cost more than Imani's first apartment had. A dining table set for 23 with the good china, the china that Imani had once admired and Sun-hee had told her, with a particular soft precision, had been in the family for 4 generations. 4 generations, Sun-hee had said, as if the sentence finished itself. Relatives arrived in waves. Aunts and uncles and cousins Imani recognized, and cousins she didn't, all of them brought to the same side of a divide she could feel but not see. They greeted her with varying degrees of warmth. Some hugged her. Some nodded. Some simply looked at her for a moment too long before looking away. Sun-hee received her at the entrance to the main sitting room. She was a small woman, precise and contained, the kind of woman who wore her dignity like a structure rather than a feeling. She had been beautiful in a severe way. When she was young, Imani had seen photographs, and she was still striking now in her 60s, all sharp lines and careful composure. "Imani," she said, and kissed her on both cheeks, and the kiss was exactly the temperature it always was. "Sun-hee," Imani said, because they had agreed on this, at least that Imani would call her by her first name, rather than a title that neither of them could carry honestly. "You look thin," Sun-hee said. "Thank you," Imani said, though it was not meant as a compliment, and they both knew it. The hours before dinner were a specific kind of long. Imani circulated. She made conversation. She accepted a glass of champagne she didn't particularly want and held it more than she drank it. She laughed at the right moments and asked about children and businesses and trips she would never be invited on. Yuna moved through the room like a satellite, always at an angle to Imani, never directly engaged, but never entirely absent. She was 38, 7 years older than Imani, and she had her mother's sharpness without her mother's restraint. Where Sun-hee delivered her observations like a surgeon, Yuna delivered hers like someone who'd had a few glasses of wine and decided the room could handle the truth. Twice, Imani caught her watching, with that particular expression, the slight compression of the mouth, the measuring quality in the eyes. The expression that said she was waiting for something. Imani didn't know what she was waiting for. She would find out soon enough. Jae-min called at 6. His voice over the phone had that quality it sometimes got when he was managing several things simultaneously, controlled, but not entirely present, the surface of him rather than the depth. Business is running late. I'll be there before dessert, I promise. It's fine, she said. She was in the upstairs hallway, away from the noise. Take your time. Are you okay? I'm fine, Jay. Imani. I'm okay, she said. And this was true in the specific narrow sense that she was upright and functional, and had not yet given anyone the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. I'll see you when you get here. She went back downstairs. Dinner began without him. 23 people arranged around that long table, with Imani's seat at one end, in a position that felt simultaneously like place of honor and deliberate exposure. She was visible from every seat. She was aware of this in the way you are aware of a draft, not dramatic, just constant, a low-level sensation that requires small, continuous adjustments. The food was beautiful. Of course it was beautiful. Sun-hee did not do anything halfway. There were courses, there were wines chosen to complement each course, there were careful discussions of the food itself that functioned as conversations about something else. Imani participated. She always participated. It was one of the things she had promised herself when she married into this life, that she would never become someone who withdrew, who let them see her shrink. She was midway through a sentence about some gallery opening Jae-min had taken her to when Yuna tapped her champagne glass twice with a perfectly manicured fingernail. The table quieted. We should do the gift, Yuna said. Something in the air shifted. It was subtle, the way weather changes before a storm, and Imani almost missed it. Almost. Sun-hee rose from her chair. She crossed to a sideboard Imani hadn't noticed before, or had noticed and dismissed as decorative, and she lifted a large box wrapped in gold paper with a white ribbon. She carried it to the table with both hands, ceremoniously, the way you carry something that matters. She set it in front of Imani. For the birthday girl, she said. The room was very quiet now, the kind of quiet that isn't absence of sound, but presence of anticipation. Imani looked around the table and registered, in a fraction of a second, that almost everyone was watching her with the same expression. The same slight tension in the jaw, the same careful neutrality that covered something else. The champagne glasses were still. A few people had their phones in hand, and she registered this too late. The significance of it, the way you sometimes see the car coming and still can't move fast enough. Go ahead, Sun-hee said. Imani opened the box. She moved the tissue paper aside, and her hands found fabric, not the silk or cashmere she might have expected in this house, not something expensive or considered. Synthetic. Rough at the edges, the color of industrial things. She lifted it out. A cleaning uniform. Cheap polyester, the kind with the name patch sewn above the breast pocket. The patch on this one was blank. The room held for exactly 1 second. Then someone laughed. One person, then another, and then the table erupted. Not the polite laughter of shared amusement, but something louder and less controlled. The laughter of people who had been waiting for this, who were relieved it was finally happening. Yuna stood from her seat. She was smiling in a way that didn't reach anywhere above her mouth. She reached behind her chair and brought out with a flourish, with an actual bow of presentation, a broom. A cheap broom with a ribbon tied around the handle, bright red, the kind of ribbon you put on something as a joke. Something more appropriate, she said, for the woman of the house. Imani heard those words very clearly. She would hear them for a long time afterward, in the spaces between other sounds. Something more appropriate for the woman of the house. She set the uniform down on the table in front of her. Her face was still. She had learned, over years of navigating spaces that didn't fully welcome her, how to make her face still. It was one of the most exhausting things she had ever learned, and she was very good at it. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She looked at the uniform, and then she looked at Yuna, and then she looked at Sun-hee, and she thought about the grandmother who had said she was born impatient for the world. And she thought about the dress she had chosen this morning that made her feel like herself. And she thought about the gold earrings with the amber stones that her mother had given her. And she thought, they do not get to have this. They do not get to see this. She said nothing. The laughter began to adjust itself, the way laughter does when the expected reaction doesn't arrive, becoming slightly uncertain, slightly louder in compensation. And then Yuna put the broom down in front of her, not beside her, in front, within reach. Go on, someone said from down the table. A male voice, some cousin, some person whose name, Imani, had made herself learn and would now unmake. She placed her hand flat on the table, just flat, a steadying gesture that no one could see the meaning of. Sun-hee was watching her, not laughing now that had been left to the others. Sun-hee was watching with an expression Imani had seen before, the expression of a woman performing an evaluation. Sun-hee said quietly enough that only the nearest seats could hear, but with a precision that carried. Marrying my son did not make you our equal. The table was not quite laughing anymore. They were listening. There are families, Sun-hee continued, who have been trying for generations to be where we are. Women who would have understood what that required of them. She looked at Imani with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so deliberately constructed. Without Jae-min's money, you would be nobody. The word nobody landed with a particular weight in that room. Imani felt it in her chest, not as a collapse, but as a kind of seismic registration, the way you feel a tremor before you understand what it means. She looked at Sun-hee directly. She did not look away. She had a feeling, sitting in that chair, that if she could get through the next 60 seconds without looking away, she would be all right. She didn't know what all right looked like past this point, but she needed to get there first. Someone near the far end of the table raised their phone higher. And then there was a sound from the direction of the door. Not a loud sound, not a dramatic sound. Just the quiet, precise sound of footsteps on marble, a specific cadence that Imani knew, as well as she knew her own heartbeat, because she had listened for it, late at night, the particular sound of her husband coming home. The footsteps stopped. The door was not fully open. It was open perhaps 6 inches. She could see a slice of the hallway beyond, dark in contrast to the blazing light of the dining room. She could see nothing in that slice of darkness. But the air in the room changed. It changed the way rooms change when something invisible has shifted, when the balance of something rearranges itself without announcement. She had felt this once before, at an event years ago, when 2 men on opposite sides of the room who hated each other became aware of each other's presence, and the whole gathering had adjusted without knowing why. Sun-hee did not notice. Yuna was looking at a phone someone had extended across the table, a photograph she was apparently evaluating with approval. Imani sat very still. She thought, he's here. She thought, oh no. She thought, how much did he hear? The answer, though she didn't know it yet, was everything. He had been standing in that hallway for longer than she realized, since before Yuna brought out the broom, since before his mother's last sentence, maybe since before the box was opened at all. Jae-min Kwon, who had built an empire on the discipline of never revealing what he knew until the moment it served him best had been standing in the cold dark of that hallway, and he had heard every syllable of what his family had done to his wife on her birthday. And his face, which Imani could not see, was the face he wore in the specific moments before consequences. Not rage. Something quieter and more permanent than rage. The footsteps resumed. The door opened. The laughter stopped so completely that the silence felt physical. 23 people at a dinner table, and every single one of them went still, glasses midway to mouths, phones half-lowered smiles, disappearing like lights, going off one at a time. Sun-hee turned first. Her expression shifted, not all at once, but in visible stages. The way a face rearranges itself when a person who has been performing suddenly finds their audience has changed. The satisfaction drained out of her first, then the confidence, then something else, something that might have been certainty, and what replaced it was a version of her features that Imani had never seen before. A woman in the first seconds of realizing she has made an irreversible mistake. Jae-min walked into the room. He was in a dark coat not yet removed, which meant he had come directly here without stopping to adjust himself. His face was nothing. That was the most frightening thing about it. From the perspective of the people at that table who knew him, not anger, not accusation, not any of the readable emotions that could be managed. Just the absolute stillness of a man who had already decided something and was now simply executing it. He walked across the marble floor. His steps were even and unhurried. He looked at no one. He walked to the table, and he looked at the cleaning uniform still lying on the surface in front of Imani. And he looked at the broom with its stupid red ribbon that someone had propped against the chair beside her. And he stood there for a moment looking at these objects the way you look at something you are making sure you are correctly understanding. Then he picked up the broom. He held it in both hands. He examined it. He turned the ribbon over once with his thumb. His face was still nothing. His mother laughed. It was a small laugh, carefully calibrated. The laugh of a woman attempting to reframe a situation that had gotten away from her. Jae-min, you're late. It was only a birthday joke. Come sit down, darling. Was she laughing? His voice was even, not raised, not tight with controlled emotion, the way voices get before they break. Just even, like a flat surface. The table was completely silent. Sun-hee opened her mouth. Was she laughing? He said again, and this time it wasn't quite a question. Imani's hands were in her lap. She could feel the fabric of her burgundy dress under her palms, the texture of it. She was aware of herself, very precisely her posture, her breathing, the amber earrings her mother had given her, the specific quality of the air in her lungs. She looked at her husband. He was looking back at her. Jay, she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected it to be. We can talk about this later. Come sit down. She was protecting them. Even now, standing on the smoking ruins of her own birthday dinner with 23 people and their phones, and her mother-in-law's last sentence still hanging in the air of this room without Jae-min's money, you would be nobody, and she was trying to protect them. Something moved across Jae-min's face. Not readable to anyone else in the room, probably. But she had been studying that face for 4 years, and she saw it, a kind of recognition that went further than the moment, deeper than the broom in his hands, or the uniform on the table, or the silence of 23 people who had no idea what was coming. He looked at her with an expression she would think about for a very long time afterward. He had loved her from early on. But this was the moment she would understand later, that he actually saw her, saw the whole shape of what she had carried, and how long she had carried it, and how alone she had been in carrying it. In this family, in this life, in these rooms that had his name on them. He set the broom down gently across the table. He reached into his coat. The room adjusted again, that shift in the air. Several people moving almost imperceptibly in their chairs. Whatever they expected, hands moved toward phones, toward excuses, toward the architecture of an explanation. He removed a small black case, matte, unremarkable, the kind of thing that might hold a pen or a watch or something equally businesslike. He walked to where Imani sat. He opened it. Inside was a key, old-fashioned physical, the kind that fit a real door. He placed it in her palm. His hand closed around hers for just a moment, warm, certain, a pressure she felt in her chest rather than just her hand, and then he let go. Imani looked at the key. She looked up at him. She did not know what it meant yet. He straightened. He looked at the room. That key, he said, opens the main door of an estate on the Hudson River. 14 bedrooms, private grounds, river access. Nobody moved. The purchase was finalized this morning. His voice remained even. It was supposed to be a birthday surprise. He looked at the key in Imani's hand. The property is registered in one name. He paused, not for effect. Or if it was for effect, it was the kind of effect that arrives from absolute truth rather than performance. Imani Whitaker Kwon. The room didn't explode. The room went so quiet that Imani could hear the candles. The deed is hers. The title is hers. No family trust attached to it. No cosigners. No contingencies. He looked directly at his mother. Nobody enters that home without her permission, including me. Sun-hee's face had gone somewhere Imani had never seen it go. Below the composure, below the performance, below the decades of careful management, there was something underneath that, something younger and more frightened, something that understood what was happening, even if it wasn't ready to admit it. Yuna's phone was fully lowered. Her expression was a specific shade of blank that happens when someone is running calculations too fast for the face to keep up. Imani sat in the chair that had felt like a target all evening, and she held the key in her palm, and she thought about how she had woken up that morning, listening to the city hum, and had made herself coffee and had worn her best earrings because she needed to feel armored without anyone knowing. She looked at her husband. She thought, he doesn't know yet. He doesn't know how long this has been. And then she thought, he knows enough. Around the table, 23 people sat in the wreckage of what they had expected this evening to be. The phones were down. The laughter was gone. The cleaning uniform lay on the table like evidence. Outside, the October dark pressed against the windows of the estate, and Imani Whitaker Kwon sat very still in her chair, with a key in her hand and her husband's standing beside her, and the full weight of a war she had never wanted, finally, irrevocably, arriving at the surface. This was not the end of anything. This was the beginning. The key was still in Imani's palm. She hadn't closed her fingers around it yet. She was just holding it the way you hold something when you're not sure whether it's real, loosely, in the center of your hand, letting it sit there while your brain catches up to what your body already knows. Jae-min hadn't moved from beside her chair. He was standing with his coat still on, which meant some part of him had known when he walked in here that he wasn't going to be staying for dinner, that he wasn't going to be sitting down and picking up a fork and pretending the table in front of him looked normal. 23 people and nobody said a word. Then Sun-hee said, Jae-min, sit down. It came out the way she had been saying things to him his entire life, with the particular authority of a woman who had never once needed to raise her voice because the command was built into the tone itself. She had used that voice to end conversations, to redirect rooms, to remind everyone present of the order of things. Jae-min didn't sit down. He didn't look at her immediately either. He was still looking at the cleaning uniform on the table. He picked it up, not roughly, just lifted it by one corner, the way you'd lift something you found on the floor that didn't belong there, and he looked at it for a long moment. Who bought this? He said. Not a question. The same flat register as before. Yuna shifted in her chair. The sound of it was very loud in the silence. It was a joke, Yuna said. A family joke. You weren't supposed to be here yet. You said you had business. We were only... I know what you were doing. The words landed without weight, which somehow made them heavier. Yuna pressed her mouth together. She had her mother's discipline in most things, but not in her face, not completely. And Imani watched the sequence move across it, the defensiveness first, then the recalculation, then the thing underneath both of those, which was not remorse, but something closer to the recognition that the game had changed and she hadn't gotten the notice. Jae-min. Sun-hee again, a different pitch this time. Softer. The voice she used when she was switching tactics. You're overreacting. Come sit with your family. It was her birthday. We wanted to... I heard what you wanted. Sun-hee stopped. I was standing in that hallway, he said, and now he looked at her, for longer than you think. The table, if possible, got more still. Imani watched her mother-in-law's face perform a rapid private calculation. She could almost see the timestamps moving behind Sun-hee's eyes, rewinding, stopping, asking the question, how much exactly? How long exactly? What exactly did he hear? The answer, when Sun-hee arrived at it, showed up as a faint tightening around the jaw. Not guilt. Not guilt yet. Something more practical, the recognition of exposure. Imani, Jae-min said, and turned to her. She looked up at him. How long? She knew exactly what he was asking. She had known this question was coming. The moment she heard his footsteps in the hallway had been dreading it, not because she didn't want to answer it, but because answering it meant doing the one thing she had spent 3 years refusing to do. She had kept this from him, not because she was a passive person, not because she was afraid, because she had looked at her husband, who loved his mother, even as his mother made it impossible, and she had decided that this was not her war to start. Jae, she said quietly. How long has this been happening? She heard the shift in his voice. Not louder, Jae-min, almost never got louder. But something in the texture of it changed, like a surface that looks smooth until you get close enough to see the grain. We can talk about it later, she said, at home. You and me. We're talking about it now. Jae-min, Imani. He crouched down slightly so he was at her eye level, which he almost never did in front of people, and the gesture was so plainly genuine that she felt it behind her sternum like a pulled thread. I'm not asking so I can be angry at you. I'm asking because I need to understand what I missed. She held the key in her palm. She thought about the first time Yuna had left an empty place setting and asked her to fetch a plate from the kitchen 18 months ago. A Sunday brunch. Jae-min had been on a call in the other room. She thought about the photographs. The family portraits arranged on the main staircase that had been updated twice since Imani joined this family, and both times her image had been absent, not through oversight, but through the specific practiced casualness of an omission that could always be explained away. She thought about the small things, the 100 small things, each one individually deniable, collectively unmistakable. She thought about how tired she was. A while, she said. Something moved across his face that she'd never seen there before. It wasn't anger, or not only anger, it was something more personal than that, more directed inward. The look of a man confronting the gap between what he believed was happening in his life and what was actually happening. He stood back up. He looked at his mother. Sun-hee had regrouped by now. 3 years of watching this woman, Imani had come to understand that Sun-hee Kwon's greatest skill was not cruelty. Cruelty was just a tool. Her greatest skill was recovery. The ability to take a situation that had gone against her and reframe it, in real time, into something she could manage. She's exaggerating, Sun-hee said. You know how. Don't. One word. Sun-hee stopped mid-sentence. Don't finish that sentence, Jae-min said, in a direction I can't come back from. A beat of silence. I heard you tonight, Amma. He used the Korean word, which he almost always did with her, but the word sat differently now, not as warmth, but as distance, as a reminder of a relationship being examined rather than inhabited. I heard exactly what you said to her. I said what needed to be said, that she's nobody without my money. The phrase dropped into the room like something heavy. Several relatives found reasons to look at the table. Yuna's fingers moved against her champagne glass without lifting it. Sun-hee's chin came up. It was a reflex, the reflex of a woman who had never once in her adult life allowed herself to look small. It's the truth. She came from nothing. We took her in. You didn't take her in. Jae-min's voice changed, not louder, but something in the register shifted, a lower frequency, something that vibrated differently in the chest. She married me. This is her home. This family is her family. That was the arrangement the day I put a ring on her hand, and if you didn't agree with the arrangement then, was the time to say so. You didn't ask our opinion. I didn't need your opinion. I'm not 16 years old. He paused. I'm the reason this table has food on it. I'm the reason this house is still standing. I'm the reason every single person in this room has what they have, and you all know that, and you sat here tonight and treated my wife like... He stopped, and the stop was more frightening than anything that came before it, like she was something you could discard. Yuna opened her mouth. You had a broom, Yuna. He turned to his sister, and his voice went quieter still, which was worse. A ribbon on a broom. You were filming it. Yuna's jaw tightened. It was a joke. You keep saying that word. Because it's true. A joke is something the person it's aimed at finds funny. He looked at Imani. Was she laughing? Yuna said nothing. I've answered that, Imani said quietly. Jae-min nodded once. He looked back at his sister. Then it wasn't a joke. It was a message. And I received it. The room was doing a particular thing that rooms do when the social architecture of them collapses. Everyone was making themselves smaller, angling away, creating small degrees of distance from the center of things as if proximity to the conflict might transfer responsibility onto them. Aunts were suddenly very interested in their food. Cousins were examining their phones with great focus. One of Jae-min's uncles, a heavy man named Byung-soo, who had been laughing loudest an hour ago, was now studying the floral arrangement to his left with the concentration of a man who had been asked to identify a rare species. Imani noticed all of it. She noticed all of it, and she filed it, precisely in the part of her mind that had been keeping records for 3 years. She noticed something else too, which was the particular quality of her own stillness. She was not shaking. She thought she might be, given the state of the last hour, but she wasn't. She was sitting in her chair, with the key in her hand, and her mother's earrings and her burgundy dress, and she was watching all of it, with a clarity that felt almost strange, like the exhaustion had burned through some layer she'd been carrying and left something cleaner underneath. Sun-hee had shifted into a different mode. Imani recognized it because she'd seen it once before. The Christmas 2 years ago when Jae-min had arrived during one of his mother's more pointed lectures about children and timing, and the things a proper wife understood. Sun-hee had seen him and pivoted mid-sentence with the smoothness of a practiced navigator, redirecting from attack to appeal so seamlessly that if you hadn't been watching carefully, you would have missed the turn entirely. She was doing it now. Jae-min, softer, the appeal voice. The mother voice, beneath the authority, the register she used when she wanted him to remember who had raised him. I'm your mother. Everything I do, everything is because I want the best for you. I want the best for this family. You know that. You have always known that. Jae-min looked at her for a long moment without speaking. I want to believe that, he said finally. Then believe it. But what I know is what I heard. And what I heard was my wife sitting at a table where she was supposed to be celebrated, and being handed a cleaning uniform and told she was nobody. He paused. And I know what I don't know, which is everything that's happened in the hours and weeks and years I wasn't in the room. He looked at Imani. How many years? She held his gaze. 3. The number sat in the room, 3 years of it. Not one incident, not one difficult dinner. 3 years of 100 small instruments, 100 care cuts administered just outside his line of sight, 100 adjustments Imani had made and absorbed and never brought home because bringing it home would have meant asking him to choose, and she had loved him too much to do that. Jae-min turned away from his mother. He walked to the window at the far end of the room, not quickly, not dramatically, just the walk of a man who needs 6 feet of distance before he can trust himself to continue the conversation. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. Nobody spoke. Then he said, without turning around, she never told me. It was directed at Sun-hee, but he wasn't looking at her. She never told me, he said again, because she was protecting me, protecting you, protecting the relationship I had with all of you. He turned around. 3 years. 3 years she absorbed everything you gave her, and she didn't say a word to me, because she knew how much I loved you, and she didn't want to be the reason I stopped. Sun-hee's mouth opened. That is the woman you gave a broom to, he said. That is who you decided to film on her birthday. Yuna made a sound half protest, half something else, something that might have been the beginning of something more honest if she'd let it. You're making it sound like we. What should I make it sound like, Yuna? He looked at his sister, and his voice was level, but there was something beneath the level now, something that had been held under pressure and was beginning to change shape from the compression. Help me understand what it should sound like. You bought a cleaning uniform. You wrapped a broom. You sat at this table and you laughed. He stopped. At my wife. At your family. At someone who has never done a single thing to deserve any part of what you've made her carry. Yuna put her glass down. The sound of it against the table was sharp. You don't know everything, Jae-min. Then tell me. He spread his hand slightly, a gesture Imani had learned meant he was actually asking, not performing. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me what she did. Tell me what justified 3 years of this. Silence. Tell me the thing she did that meant she deserved to be handed a cleaning uniform on her birthday while you filmed it. Yuna said nothing. Tell me the thing she did, he said, quieter now. That meant my mother told her she was nobody. The fireplace at the far wall ticked. The candles moved in some imperceptible draft. 23 people sat in the splendid wreckage of what this evening had been supposed to be, and the only sounds some were small, involuntary ones, a breath, a glass being set down very carefully, the shift of someone's chair. Imani stood up. She hadn't planned it. Her body decided before her mind did, the way bodies sometimes do when they've been waiting long enough. She stood up from the chair and she was steadier than she expected to be. And she looked at the cleaning uniform still on the table in front of where she'd been sitting. And then she looked at her mother-in-law. Sun-hee, she said. Sun-hee looked at her. And for the first time in 3 years, Imani saw something shift in those composed, evaluating eyes, something that might have been a flicker of uncertainty, or might have been the first edge of recognition, that this woman standing in front of her was not who she had decided she was. I've never raised my voice in this house, Imani said. I've never made a scene. I've not once gone to my husband with what you said to me when he wasn't in the room. She paused. I want you to hear me say that. I want you to understand that was a choice I made, not because I was afraid of you, not because I didn't have the words. She held Sun-hee's gaze. Because I respected what you meant to him. She picked up the cleaning uniform from the table. She folded it, deliberately, carefully, with a precision that filled the silence. She folded it the way you fold something you're done with, and she placed it back in the box and she put the lid back on. "I'm not angry at you," she said. Sun-hee blinked. Whatever she had been preparing for, it wasn't this. "I'm not angry," Imani said again. "I'm tired, and that's worse." She looked at the box. 3 years of being tired wears on a person in ways that don't show on the surface. You never got to see the ways it was wearing on me because I made sure of it. She looked up at Sun-hee. "I was protecting your relationship with your son. That was the only reason. And you used it." The room was doing something Imani had never felt it do before. It was listening. Not performing attention, actually listening. The 23 people at that TOEFL suddenly very still in the specific way of people who understand they are witnessing something that is not going to be talked about afterward in the usual terms. The uniform, Imani said, was supposed to be a humiliation. "I understand that." She didn't raise her voice. "I've been handed smaller versions of this same thing every few months for 3 years. The messages behind them were the same one. You don't belong here. You're here on our sufferance. We could remove you." She paused. "I want you to know that I heard the message every time. I'm not stupid. I was never stupid." She picked up the key from where she'd set it on the table. "And I want you to know," she said, looking at Sun-hee, then at Yuna, then at the table in general, at the uncles and cousins and in-laws and associates who had sat here and laughed, that belonging in this life was never the point. I wasn't trying to belong in your version of it. I was building something with my husband that had nothing to do with your approval. She closed her fingers around the key. Yuna said, "You don't understand what this family." Yuna, Jae-min, from across the room, one word. Yuna stopped. He walked back toward the table. He walked to Imani, and he stood beside her, not in front of her, not between her and the room, but beside her, at her shoulder, which was the specific placement of a man who is indicating alliance rather than protection. And he looked at his family. "I'm going to say this once," he said. The room had the quality of a held breath. "Every privilege this family receives, that flows through me, the properties, the business arrangements, the accounts, the access, those are under review as of tonight." He didn't elaborate, and he didn't need to. Several faces at the table understood immediately what that meant in concrete terms. Byung-soo looked up from the floral arrangement for the first time in 10 minutes. A cousin near the far end made an involuntary sound that wasn't quite a word. "That review will reflect what I've learned tonight." Sun-hee said, "Jae-min, you cannot, I am the only one who can." His voice didn't change. "That's the nature of the arrangement, Amma. I built this. I fund this, you have all known that. Tonight you chose to treat that as irrelevant. This is her doing." Yuna started. "She didn't tell me anything." His voice went very quiet. "I told you that already. I was standing in the hallway. This is what I saw with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. Don't put her name on your choices." Yuna's eyes went to Imani. "Not with hatred, exactly, with something more complicated than hatred, something that had anger in it, but also Imani thought something older and more private, something she wasn't going to get the full story of tonight. You came into this family," Yuna said, and her voice had lost its polish now, was just raw at the edges, "and you changed everything. Before you, he was..." "Here," Jae-min said. "Finish that sentence. Tell me what I was before." Yuna pressed her mouth together. "Tell me," he said, "what I was before that was better. Because what I remember about before is that I came to every family dinner, and I sat at this table, and I listened to everyone's problems, and I signed the checks, and I made the calls, and I went home alone to an apartment that felt like a hotel, and I did not know how to want anything for myself." His voice was still even, but there was something behind the even now, something that had worn through the surface. "Imani is the first person in my adult life who wanted nothing from me except me. And you spent 3 years trying to make her feel like nothing." He took Imani's hand. Not a performance. Just his hand closing around hers, the same way it had when he placed the key in her palm warm. "Certain. We're leaving," he said. Imani thought she would feel more when he said it. She had imagined this kind of moment, or a version of it, in the small hours of difficult nights, the moment of being publicly defended, the moment of no longer standing alone in this. She had imagined it would feel like relief, like water after thirst. What she felt instead was something more complicated. She felt the relief. Yes, she felt it in her chest, a loosening of something she had held tightly for so long that she'd stopped noticing the holding. But she also felt something heavier than relief, the specific weight of a thing that can't be undone. Because they were leaving, and in leaving they were marking the line, and the line once marked, meant that everything that came after would be a consequence of having marked it. She had spent 3 years trying to prevent this line from being drawn. Now it was drawn. She took a breath, and she looked at her mother-in-law one more time. Sun-hee was standing very straight. She always stood very straight. But something in the posture had changed. It was still upright, but there was a quality to it now that was effort rather than habit. The posture of a woman who was holding herself up rather than one who stood up naturally. Their eyes met. Imani thought about 3 years of this woman's regard the assessments and the casual cruelties and the specific art of an insult delivered beneath the level of accusation. She thought about how much energy she had spent finding ways to navigate it, around it, through it, without touching it. She thought, I don't hate you. She did not say it. She would not say it here. But she held it privately, as the truest thing she had felt all evening, not triumph, not vindication. Just the recognition that after everything, she could still locate something in herself that wasn't hate, and that this was hers, and that nobody in this room had been able to take it from her. She picked up her evening bag from the chair. Jae-min's hand was at her back as they crossed the room. 23 people watched them walk toward the door. No one spoke. Not Yuna, not Sun-hee, not Byung-soo, who'd been laughing so freely an hour ago. The chairs of the Kwon family dining room, all 23 of them, held their occupants in a silence that was entirely different from the silence before Jae-min had walked in. That silence had been anticipation. This one was something else. They were almost at the door when Sun-hee spoke. You'll regret this. The words landed in the air between them. Jae-min stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood in the doorway with his hand at his wife's back. And he was still for a moment, and the room was still with him. Regret what? He said to the door, rather than the room. Sun-hee's voice was tighter now, the composure starting to go threadbare at the edges. Choosing her over your family. Choosing an outsider over your own blood. He turned then, slowly, all the way around. He looked at his mother and his mother looked at him, and Imani stood beside him and watched them see each other across the length of that room. And something in the air between them was negotiating itself in a language she didn't fully have access to, the long private language of a mother and a son. All the history and love and damage compressed into a look. She is my family, he said. She's the family I chose. And when you decided to treat her the way you did tonight, he stopped. And the stop was the most frightening thing he'd said. All evening you chose too. He looked at his sister. The business accounts tied to my network, Yuna's, the Gangnam property, the operating credit for the design firm, those get frozen tomorrow morning. That's not punishment. That's me correcting an imbalance I should have addressed a long time ago. He looked at the room. Anyone who thinks they have an ongoing arrangement with me that wasn't documented in writing, you don't have that arrangement anymore. Yuna stood up from her chair. You can't do this. It's already done. He looked at his sister steadily. You had a ribbon on a broom, Yuna. You need to think very carefully about whether that was worth it. The color left Yuna's face in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Imani felt Jae-min's hand move to her elbow. They walked out. The car was waiting at the bottom of the stone steps. Mr. Park, standing beside it with the patient stillness of a man who had spent 15 years learning not to register what he saw. He opened the door without a word. Imani got in. Jae-min got in beside her. The door closed. The estate disappeared behind the hedgerows as Mr. Park pulled through the gates, and the dark of the October night came up around the car, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Imani was looking at the key in her hand. 14 bedrooms, she said finally. Yeah, that's too many bedrooms. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, though there was nothing to see but the backs of Mr. Park's shoulders and the road pulling away beneath them. How long were you standing in that hallway, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough. How long? He looked at her then. Since before she brought the box out. She absorbed that. The sequence played in her head. The table, the gift, the unwrapping, the uniform, the broom, Yuna's smile, his mother's voice, 23 people and their phones, and the laughter that had gone through the room like a match through paper. All of it while he was in the hallway. All of it while he heard. Her eyes were wet. She hadn't noticed when that started. You should have told me, he said. Not as an accusation. Just said it. I know. 3 years, Imani. I know. She pressed her fingers against the corner of her eye. I know. Every time I thought about saying something, I thought about what you'd have to do if you knew, what it would cost you, what it would cost us. She shook her head. I didn't want to be the reason. He reached over and took her hand, not the one with the key, the other one, and held it on the seat between them. You're not the reason, he said. They're the reason. She nodded. The car moved through the dark. The city was still an hour away. The Hudson was out there, somewhere to the west, dark and wide, and somewhere along it there was a house with 14 bedrooms, whose key she was holding in her hand, and tomorrow it would all begin the consequences, the accounting, the slow and difficult work of everything that came after a night like this. But right now there was just the car and the dark, and his hand over hers, and the strange, unprecedented, almost unbearable sensation of not carrying it alone. She looked down at the key. I want a kitchen with a window that faces the river, she said. He was quiet a moment. I'll have one put in, he said. She nodded. She leaned her head back against the seat and she closed her eyes. They were not out of it yet, she knew that. The family was back there in that dining room, and they were already regrouping, already calculating, already crux-ing, already constructing the version of tonight they could live with. And Sun-hee, who was not a woman who accepted any outcome she hadn't authored, was already thinking about what came next. Tomorrow it would start. The phones would ring. The relatives would mobilize. The story would be revised until it had a different shape and a different villain. And the business privileges, Yuna's import license, the properties, the credit lines, those freezes would hit their accounts in the morning. And when they did, the calls would start in earnest, and the anger would become something organized rather than something reactive. And organized anger from people with resources and wounded pride was a different thing entirely from what had happened tonight. Imani kept her eyes closed. She felt the key between her fingers. She thought, it doesn't matter. Whatever comes next, it doesn't matter. Because now he knows. Now he knows. And now there is nothing left to protect them from, and whatever they bring, we're bringing it together. She held that thought carefully, the way you hold something fragile on a moving vehicle steadily, with both hands, adjusting for every turn. The car carried them through the dark, and behind them, in the lit windows of the estate, Sun-hee Kwon stood at the dining room window and watched the taillights disappear, and something moved across her face that none of the 23 people still seated at her table would have recognized, because it was not the face she had ever allowed them to see. It was the face of a woman who understood, for the first time in 3 years, that she had badly, irreversibly miscalculated, and that the woman she had given a broom to was not going to pick it up. Not now. Not ever. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Imani knew because she was still awake. She had not moved to sleep, not from distress exactly, or not only from distress, but from the specific restlessness of someone whose body hadn't caught up to the fact that the thing it had been braced against for 3 years had finally happened. The tension was still there even though the event was over, like a hand that keeps gripping after you've already set the object down. She was in the sitting room of the hotel suite Jae-min had moved them to for the night he hadn't wanted to go back to the apartment, which was technically in a building registered to a Kwon family holding company, and she understood the reasoning without him explaining it. And she had her knees pulled up and a glass of water she wasn't drinking, and she was watching the city out the window when she heard his phone go off in the bedroom. She heard him answer it. She heard the register of his voice change within the first 2 sentences. That particular frequency drop she had learned to recognize as the sound of Jae-min, shifting from private to operational, from husband to whatever the other thing was. She had learned not to follow him into those conversations. Not because he asked her not to. He had never asked her to stay away from any part of his life, but because she had understood early that there were rooms in his world she could stand in without fully inhabiting them, and that this was one. He came out. After 4 minutes, he was already dressed. She didn't know when he'd changed, she hadn't heard it, but he was in dark clothes, jacket on, and his face had the quality it got when he was managing multiple things simultaneously, except that this time there was something underneath the management that she hadn't seen before, a tautness around the jaw that wasn't just control. What happened, she said. He looked at her. He had the expression of a man deciding how much of a thing to say. Jay, what happened? Yuna moved faster than I expected, he said. She put her feet on the floor. Tell me. He sat down across from her. Not beside her across, which meant the thing he was about to say required the ability to watch her face while he said it. She made some calls tonight, before we were out of the driveway. He paused. There's a man named David Lim. He runs the finance side of the network in the Northeast accounting, transfers, the infrastructure that keeps everything moving. He's been with the family since before I took over. He paused again, and the pause was doing something that sentences couldn't do yet. He's also been running a parallel operation for the last 8 months. Skimming, rerouting, small enough percentages that the audits wouldn't catch them on a quarterly cycle. He looked at her steadily. Yuna knew. She's been using it as leverage over him. If he stayed quiet and did what she asked, she stayed quiet about the skimming. Imani absorbed this. What did she ask him to do? Jae-min's jaw tightened. Tonight she asked him to pull the authorization codes for the Hudson property transfer. The room went very quiet. The deed, Imani said. The transfer went through this morning. The property is yours, that's done, that's registered, no one can touch that. He said this with a precision that meant he had already verified it twice. But what Lim had access to was the account the purchase drew from. One of the primary operating accounts for the Northeast network. He met her eyes. He liquidated it. 12 minutes after Yuna called him. Moved the funds through 3 intermediate accounts and into something offshore that's going to take my people days to trace. Imani stared at him. How much, she said. He told her. She had been in this life long enough to understand large numbers without being shocked by them. She was shocked by this one. Not because of what it meant to the empire she understood, distantly, that Jae-min's network was large enough that this was survivable, but because of what it meant about the scale of what Yuna had prepared. You didn't build 8 months of leverage over a financial officer and keep it in reserve unless you were planning for a moment exactly like this one, a moment when you might need a weapon. She planned this, Imani said. She had contingencies. That's different from planning. He was being precise about it, which was what he did when something had gotten under his skin far enough that precision was the only way he could stay level. She didn't know tonight was going to happen, but she had pieces in place in case something did. Pieces in place, Imani repeated. Lim is one. I don't know yet if there are others. She looked at him. You don't know. Not yet. She sat with that for a moment. Not the money. The money was enormous and frightening in the abstract. But she had grown to understand that in Jae-min's world, enormous and frightening was sometimes just Tuesday. What she was sitting with was something else. The shape of what Yuna had been doing, quietly, while Imani was navigating Sunday brunches and family photographs and cleaning uniforms wrapped in birthday paper. While she had been trying not to become a problem, Yuna had been building an arsenal. There's something else, Jae-min said. She looked at him. Lim wasn't working alone on the skimming. He had a partner in the accounting structure, someone who had access to the internal records, who could make the numbers look clean on the monthly reviews. He paused. The partner has been in place for 2 years. Who? He was quiet for a moment. Who, Jay? His name is Marcus Webb, he said. He came in through a referral from one of my associates, 18 months after we got married. Compliance background, impeccable references, the kind of hire that looks like exactly what it is, so you don't look for what it isn't. He paused. The referral came from a contact in Atlanta. Imani didn't move. She held herself very still, the way she had learned to hold herself in the Kwon dining room, the way her body had developed for exactly the kind of moment where moving would cost you something. What contact? She said. Jae-min reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table between them. A printed photograph, which meant someone on his staff had gotten to a printer in the last 4 minutes, which meant this had been known or suspected for longer than 4 minutes. She looked at the photograph. She recognized the man in it. His name was Derek Whitaker. He was her cousin. Second cousin, technically her mother's brother's son, and she hadn't seen him in almost 6 years, since a family gathering in Atlanta that had ended badly, for reasons she had chosen not to examine too closely at the time. He had always been the member of the family that other members of the family discussed in careful, limited terms. Smart, people said, with a particular emphasis that meant smart, in directions that make us nervous. He had moved around. Different cities, different ventures, the kind of resume that looked like ambition, until you looked at it more carefully and noticed the pattern of exits. She had not told Jae-min much about him. There hadn't seemed to be much to tell. He was peripheral. He was in the past. He was one of those family relationships that lives at the very edge of the map where you don't go. She stared at the photograph. He reached out to you? Jae-min said. Not a question. She looked up. What? Before we got married. He made contact with one of my people, through a back channel. He paused, and she could see him managing the delivery of this, not to protect her from it, but to give her the space to hear it without it all hitting at once. He was offering information about you. The room shifted. What kind of information? She said. The kind that was designed to look damaging. He looked at her steadily. It wasn't. We verified all of it within 48 hours and none of it held up. It was fabricated, sloppy fabrication. The kind that falls apart when you apply any pressure at all. I assumed at the time that it was someone with a grudge and nothing real behind it. I had my people tell him the contact wasn't welcome, and I didn't think about it again. You didn't tell me? No. You investigated my family, and you didn't tell me. I investigate everyone. That's not an excuse, that's just what's true. He kept his eyes on hers. I should have told you. That's also true. She got up from the couch. She needed to be standing. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to the room, and looked at the city, which was still doing its 3 a.m. thing, quieter, but never quiet, the lights of it pressing up against the glass. Her cousin, her second cousin who she hadn't seen in 6 years, who she'd considered peripheral, who she had not thought about when she married Jae-min or, in the years afterward, had tried to torpedo her marriage before it started, and then, apparently, had spent the intervening years finding another angle in. He connected with Lim through the Atlanta contact. She said to the window, the referral for Webb. We think so. The timeline lines up. So he's been inside your operation for how long? If the Webb connection is what it looks like, 18 months. She pressed her forehead very lightly against the glass. The cold of it went through her skin. Why? Money. Probably. Or he stopped. She turned around. Or what? He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the managed control, and not the rare unguarded warmth. Something more uncomfortable than either the expression of a man confronting the possibility that he has been maneuvered and cannot fully see the edges of the maneuvering yet. Or someone paid him to do it, he said. Someone who had an interest in destabilizing the network at a moment of vulnerability. She stared at him. What moment of vulnerability? Now, he said simply. This. Tonight. What happened at the dinner table? What's going to follow it if someone wanted to hit the operation? At a moment when I was dealing with internal family problems, tonight would be the night they chose. The shape of it came together in her mind slowly, the way a picture comes together when you find the edge pieces first. The dinner, the humiliation, the broom with the ribbon. Yuna's phone call to Lim 12 minutes after they left. A man in Atlanta who had tried to destroy her marriage before it started, and then went quiet for 3 years, and then reappeared inside her husband's organization through a side door. You think tonight was engineered, she said. I think parts of it were accelerated, he said carefully. My mother's hatred of you is genuine. Yuna's resentment is genuine. Those aren't manufactured. But the timing, the escalation to what happened tonight, on this specific night, he paused. Someone may have been pushing on it, making sure it happened now rather than at some other moment. She walked back to the couch. She sat down. She put her face in her hands, not crying, just needing for a moment the private dark behind her palms. Her cousin, a financial officer running a parallel skimming operation, a compliance officer who was a plant, her husband's sister on the phone 12 minutes after they left, possibly someone else, somewhere else, watching the cascade and timing their next move. She had spent 3 years trying not to become a problem. She had been a target the entire time. She lifted her face from her hands. What do you need from me? She said. He looked at her. The question had surprised him. She could see it, the slight adjustment in his expression. Right now, tonight, she said, what do you need? I need you to be safe, he said. That's the first thing. I'm safe. What else? He studied her for a moment. I need to understand the Derek situation. Everything you know about him. Everything you remember about the last time you saw him. The context around it. Who he was connected to then. She nodded. Okay. It might take a while. It's 3 in the morning, she said. I'm not sleeping. They talked until nearly 5. She told him everything she could remember about Derek Whitaker, not just the public outline, but the texture of it. The specific quality of his resentments and his ambitions, the way he had always looked at her with a slightly calculating edge that she had chalked up to family dynamics, and now, reconstructing it from this angle, looked different. The gathering 6 years ago where things had gone badly, an argument about money, about their grandmother's estate, about who had gotten what and who deserved more. Derek had said something to her that night that she had filed away and stopped thinking about. You always fall into the right places, Imani. Someday someone's going to want to know how you manage that. She had thought it was just bitterness. People said bitter things at family arguments about inheritance. She had let it go. She told Jae-min about it now. He listened without interrupting, which was what he did when he was building something in his mind, assembling information into architecture. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He approached my network 3 months before I proposed to you, he said. 3 months before. Yes. So he knew. Before I had any idea you were going to propose. Someone told him we were serious. Someone in a position to know that, or to infer it. He paused. That narrows the list. She thought about this list. She thought about who had known, 3 months before Jae-min proposed, that they were serious enough that someone watching from the outside would have started making moves. It wasn't a long list. It was, in fact, a short and specific list, and one name on it sat differently than the others. She looked at Jae-min. Minjun, she said. Minjun Kwon was Jae-min's younger brother. He lived in Seoul, ran the East Asia side of the network, and in 4 years Imani had met him exactly 3 times. He was quieter than Yuna, less obviously hostile. The kind of person whose surface was so smooth that you didn't look for what was beneath it. At each of their 3 meetings, he had been polite to her in a way that was perfectly calibrated, not warm, not cold, not anything you could locate on a map. Jae-min was very still. I don't want to say his name without evidence, Imani said. You're not saying it as an accusation, James said quietly. You're saying it as a possibility, yes. He stood up. He walked to the window where she had stood before, and he put his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the city. And she watched the back of him, the set of his shoulders, and she knew that she had just said the most dangerous thing that had been said all night. More dangerous than the cleaning uniform. More dangerous than his mother's sentence about nobody. More dangerous than Yuna's phone call to Lim. Because this was his brother. This was the other member of his family, who was not his mother or his sister. This was the brother he had spoken about, with a particular guardedness that she had always interpreted as the guardedness of complicated love. 2 men in the same brutal business who had grown up in the same house and loved each other, in the specific way of people who have also sometimes been in competition. I need to make a call, he said to the window. Jay. He turned around. His face was controlled, but something in the eyes was not. I could be wrong, she said. You could be, he agreed. I'm going to find out. He walked into the bedroom. She heard him on the phone, not the words, just the tone, which was low and very flat, the voice he used when he was issuing instructions rather than having conversations. She heard it for 3 minutes, and then it stopped, came back out. Get some sleep, he said. I'm not going to sleep. Imani, are you going to sleep? He looked at her. No. Then I'm not sleeping either. He sat back down across from her. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the hotel suite in the gray pre-dawn light, the city behind the window, going slightly paler, the first suggestion of morning in the sky to the east. She thought about the key. She put it on the nightstand in the bedroom. An $80 million estate on the Hudson River, in her name, the deed registered and immovable, the one thing that had happened tonight that nobody could reach backward and undo. She thought about the kitchen window facing the river that she had asked for, the specific smallness of that request in the context of everything, and she thought that was the truest thing she'd said all night, not the speech to Sun-hee, not the quiet words in the car, but that, a window facing the river, something ordinary in hers. I want you to know something, she said. He looked at her. Whatever is happening, Derek, Lim, Min-jun, whoever is behind whatever this is, I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. She held his gaze. I'm not going to be afraid, and I'm not going to go quiet, and I'm not going to pretend tonight was something smaller than it was. She paused. But I'm also not going to be used as the reason you burn down everything you built. Whatever decisions you make about your family, about Minjun, that has to come from you. not from protecting me. He was quiet for a moment. That's a hard thing to separate, he said. I know. Separate it anyway. He looked at her for a long time. You know what I thought when I was standing in that hallway? What? I thought before I even understood what I was hearing, I thought, she's still sitting up straight. Even in the middle of all of it, she's sitting straight. He shook his head slightly. I've been in rooms with men who ran cartels, and I've watched them flinch. You were sitting at a birthday dinner getting handed a cleaning uniform, and you were sitting straight. She didn't know what to say to that. You're not someone who needs protecting, he said. I know that. But I'm going to anyway. I know you are. And the decisions I make about my family, he said, will come from me. But the reason will always be partly you. That's just the truth. I can't change that. She nodded. She accepted that. It was the most honest thing he could have said, and it was complicated and real in the way of things that are actually true rather than things that are arranged to sound true. Outside the window, the city was getting lighter. The sky to the east was going from black to a particular shade of gray-blue that happened in the 20 minutes before sunrise, and the city's lights were still on, but looked slightly less necessary than they had an hour ago. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. An unknown number, which she would normally ignore, but something made her pick it up. A text message. No name attached. Ask your husband why Min Jun was in New York last week. She stared at the screen. She turned the phone so Jae-min could see it. He read it. His expression didn't change on the surface, but something behind it did that seismic registration she had felt in herself. Earlier in the evening, the body's response to information that is both a surprise and, somehow, not a surprise at all. He told me he was in Seoul, Jae-min said. His voice was very quiet. He called me Wednesday, he said. I asked him about a Seoul contract. He said he was handling it from the office. He looked at the phone. He was in New York. Imani set the phone down on the table between them. Who sent that? She said. I don't know. Someone who wants you to know he was here. Someone who wants you to look at him. Or someone who wants me to move against him based on an anonymous text message. At 5 in the morning, he said, which would be exactly the kind of mistake that could be used later. He was thinking aloud now, the way he did when the variables were multiplying faster than the certainties. Someone is steering this. The question is whether they're steering me toward Min Jun, because Min Jun is actually the problem, or steering me toward Min Jun because that's the move that does the most damage. She thought about that. There's a third option, she said. He looked at her. Both, she said. Min Jun is involved, and someone is also using that to steer you. He was quiet for a long moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a full 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than Jae-min Kwon ever looked at anything before acting on it. And in those 2 extra seconds, she understood that the name on the screen was not one of his staff. He answered it. Min Jun, he said. She held very still. The voice on the other end was inaudible to her. Too low, too far from the speaker. But she watched Jae-min's face and she read it the way she had learned to read it over 4 years of learning the grammar of his expressions, and what she saw in the first 10 seconds was surprise, genuine surprise, which meant whatever Min Jun was saying was not what he expected to hear. Then she saw anger, not the controlled version, the version beneath it. Then she saw something she had never seen on her husband's face in 4 years of marriage. She had seen him afraid once, early on, a situation she was not supposed to know about, and which she had put together from fragments and then quietly set aside. That time the fear had been physical, the fear of a specific outcome, a concrete threat. This was different. This was the specific fear of a man who is realizing that the architecture of something he believed in has been built on a foundation he never examined. He listened for 40 seconds. He said 3 words she couldn't hear them. Clearly, one of them might have been a name, one of them might have been when, and then he lowered the phone. He didn't hang up. He just lowered it. He looked at Imani. Min Jun wasn't working against me, he said. She waited. He was in New York because he found out about Lim 8 weeks ago. He's been running a parallel investigation without telling me because he thought. He stopped. His jaw tightened. He thought if he told me, I'd move too fast and whoever was above Lim would disappear before we could identify them. Above Lim, she said. Lim was working for someone. Not Yuna. Yuna used what was already there. She didn't build it. Someone built it. He set the phone on the table. Min Jun has a name. She looked at him. The pre-dawn light was coming through the windows now, pale and flat, and Jae-min Kwon sat in it, looking like a man who had arrived at a place he could not navigate backward from. Not because of the money, not because of the network, because of what came next, because meant a person, and a person meant a confrontation, and a confrontation, with this much already in motion, meant that the ordinary categories of his life, what was business, what was family, what was the thing that had to happen next, were no longer organized the way they had been. "Tell me," she said. He looked at her. He said the name. And the room, which had already rearranged itself several times tonight, rearranged itself one final time into something neither of them had words for, yet a shape that would require everything they had to navigate, everything they were, every ounce of the thing they had built between them in 4 years of learning each other in the dark. Outside, the sun came up over Manhattan. It was technically still her birthday. The name was Jae-min Kwon. Not a cousin, not an associate, not some peripheral figure operating at the edge of the map where you don't look too closely. Jae-min Kwon was Jae-min's uncle, his father's younger brother, the man who had sat at the right hand of the previous generation's empire, and who had, when Jae-min's father died 11 years ago, stepped back with apparent grace and allowed his nephew to assume control of everything. He had been present at every major family event since. He had offered counsel when asked. He had attended the wedding. He had kissed Imani on both cheeks, exactly the way Sun-hee had, and said, in careful English, that she was a beautiful addition to the family. He had been at the dinner table tonight. Third seat from the left, dark suit. He had laughed when Yuna brought out the broom. Imani remembered him specifically because he had laughed a half-second before. Everyone else not following the room, but leading it, the laugh of a man who knew the joke was coming. She had registered it at the time and filed it under the wrong category. Jae-min was on his feet. He was moving through the hotel suite with a controlled efficiency that she recognized as the outermost layer of something that was not controlled at all, packing nothing, touching nothing, just moving, the way animals move when the air changes. "How long has Minjun known it was him?" Imani said. 3 weeks. He was at the window now, looking down at the street, scanning something. He built the case from the limb transactions backward. The money flows in a pattern that only makes sense if someone with Raymond's level of access was directing it, and he didn't tell you for 3 weeks. He was trying to get enough to be certain. He turned from the window. Raymond has been moving assets, quietly, gradually, over the last 8 months, shifting things out of the network's reach into structures that can't be touched if the main operation gets compromised. He paused. He's been preparing to burn the Northeast network down and walk away from the wreckage. Imani thought about Raymond at the dinner table, the timing of his laugh, the careful placement of a man who had come to watch something happen rather than participate in it. He used Yuna, she said. Yuna used herself. But yes, he knew about her feelings toward you. He knew about my mother's contempt, and he positioned Lim inside the structure months ago, waiting for the right moment of internal disruption. He stopped moving. He didn't create tonight, but he was ready for something like tonight. Ready to do what? To move while I was dealing with family. He looked at her. In this business, a man distracted by domestic problems is a man with gaps. Gaps are when you move. She stood up. So what happened tonight at the estate, the dinner, the uniform, all of it, was probably going to happen eventually on its own. The contempt was real. The cruelty was real. But the specific timing, he stopped. Raymond has been in contact with Yuna for months. We don't know what he said to her. We don't know if he accelerated it deliberately, or just waited for her to create the moment herself. Does it matter? He looked at her for a second. No, not for what I have to do next. His phone was already at his ear. He made 3 calls in 5 minutes, each one shorter than the last. She didn't hear names he'd shifted into the Korean. She understood partially, and the operational shorthand. She didn't understand it all, but she heard the tone, and the tone was the sound of a machine engaging. On the 3rd call, he said 1 sentence and hung up. He looked at her. Raymond is still at the estate, he said. He stayed after we left. He's been in Masa's sitting room for the last 2 hours. A cold feeling moved through her. With your mother. With my mother, she thought about Sun-hee at the window watching their taillights. She thought about the face she had described to herself as the face of a woman who had badly miscalculated. She thought about whether she had read that correctly, or whether she had read it the way she sometimes read things, through the filter of what she needed to believe. "Does your mother know?" she said. "About what Raymond is doing?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. But you have a feeling." "I have a feeling," he said carefully, "that my mother has always believed Raymond was her ally, that she trusted him because he was the only person in the family who consistently confirmed her view of things." He paused. "I don't think she knew about Lim or the financial structure, but I think she's been talking to Raymond about you for a long time, and I think he used what she told him." Imani picked up her evening bag. She put her mother's earrings, which she had removed at some point, and set on the table, back in. The small amber stones caught the growing morning light. "Then we need to go back," she said. He looked at her. "Raymond is in that own house with your mother right now, at 5 in the morning, after everything that happened tonight." She held his gaze. "You need to know what she knows. And you need to know it before he decides she knows too much." The last sentence landed between them and stayed there. Jae-min reached for his phone. The car moved through the just-born morning like something urgent and quiet. Mr. Park did not ask questions. He had not asked questions in 15 years, and he did not start now. He drove the way he always drove, with the particular focus of a man who understood that his job was the space between destinations, not the destinations themselves. Imani sat beside Jae-min in the back seat. Their shoulders were touching. She was aware of this, specifically the contact, the warmth of it through the fabric of his jacket, because she had the feeling that this was the last ordinary moment for a while, and she wanted to register it properly. He was on his phone. Texts, mostly, coming and going with a speed that meant the machine he'd engaged was already moving. His face in the passing streetlights was the controlled face, the operational face, but the jaws was set in a way that control alone didn't account for. "Minjun is meeting us there," he said. "Good. If Raymond is still in the house when we arrive." "I know," he looked at her. "This isn't going to be like the dinner." "I know," she said again. "I need you to stay." "Don't," she said. Not unkindly. "Don't tell me where to stay. I'll make my own decisions about where I stand." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and looked back at his phone, and she looked back out the window, and the city moved past them, waking up without knowing what it was waking into. The estate gates were open. This was wrong, and they both knew it. At this hour, before 6 in the morning, the gates of the Kwon estate were kept closed, with a keypad and a security system that had been in place for years. Open gates at 5:45 a.m. meant either someone had left them open deliberately or the security staff had been told to. Mr. Park slowed. Jae-min said, "Keep going." They went through. The main house was lit more than it should have been, more lights than were reasonable for the hour. The formal rooms blazed. Upstairs, the family wing was dark. The sitting room at the east end of the ground floor, Sun-hee's private territory, showed light through the curtains. 2 cars Imani didn't recognize were parked on the far side of the circular drive. Not family cars. Not the kind of vehicles that belong to guests at a private family residence at this hour. Jae-min looked at them for a second as Mr. Park stopped the car. "Stay here," he said to Imani. She opened her door. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "I'm not your asset," she said. "I'm your wife. Let's go." The front door was unlocked. She noticed it at the same time he did the way. It gave slightly before the key was needed, the door already ajar by half an inch. Jae-min put his hand flat against it and opened it without touching the handle, which she understood was deliberate, which meant he was reading the situation as something beyond a difficult family conversation. The entrance hall was empty. The chandeliers were burning full. The flowers from the dinner table had been moved. She could see them pushed to the side, some arrangement disturbed, and there were 2 glasses on the hall table that hadn't been there when they left, which meant people had been drinking in the hallway, which was not something that happened in this house. Jae-min moved forward. She stayed 1 step behind, and 1 step to his left, not hiding behind him, just out of the direct line of the entrance to the corridor. She hadn't been in enough dangerous situations to have trained responses, but she had learned from years of watching how he moved through uncertain spaces, and she had absorbed enough to know that the center of a doorway was not where you wanted to be. Voices from the sitting room. 2 of them. One was Sun-hee. She recognized the register, the particular cadence of her mother-in-law's Korean, even through a closed door. The other was male, lower, unhurried. Unhurried was what struck her. A man speaking at 5:45 in the morning, in a house that wasn't his, unhurried, meant a man who did not expect to be interrupted. Jae-min put his hand on the sitting room door. He opened it. Raymond Kwon was 61 years old and looked 10 years younger in the way of men who have always had the resources to look however they chose. He was sitting in Sun-hee's favorite chair, the high-backed one near the fireplace, the chair that Sun-hee had always occupied when she wanted the visual authority of height, with a glass of something amber in one hand and his other hand resting on the armrest, with the complete relaxation of a man in his own space. Sun-hee was on the small sofa across from him. She was still dressed from dinner. She had not slept. Her composure was intact, but there were things beneath it that Imani could read now. Having spent 3 years learning to read this woman's face, a tension in the hands, folded in her lap, the knuckles showing slightly. Something in the set of her shoulders that was not the natural posture but the performed one. She was frightened. She was frightened, and she was doing what she always did when frightened, which was to hold herself so upright that the fear couldn't be seen from any angle. Raymond looked at the door. He looked at Jae-min. He looked at Imani. And he smiled. An actual smile, not the social version. The smile of a man who has been waiting for the scene to arrive, and finds it satisfying that it finally has. Jae-min, he said, you made good time. Jae-min said nothing. He stood in the doorway, and he looked at Raymond in the chair that was not his chair, and he looked at his mother on the sofa, and he was doing, Imani realized, the same thing she had done at the dinner table, making his face still, buying himself the seconds to read the room completely before the room knew it was being read. Sit down, Raymond said, gesturing with his glass toward the other chairs. No, Jae-min said. Raymond's smile adjusted but didn't disappear. Always so direct, you got that from your father. He was direct too. He swirled the glass. It was his best quality and his most dangerous one. Where are your people, Jae-min said. My people? The 2 cars outside aren't family vehicles. I don't recognize them. So you brought people into this house tonight. His voice was level. Where are they? Raymond lifted his chin slightly. You're in your mother's sitting room, Jae-min. Not a battlefield. Where are they? A pause. Something shifted in Raymond's expression, not quite the first sign of genuine engagement, as opposed to performance, but close. Downstairs, he said. The staff quarters. They won't bother anyone. Why are they here? I'm a careful man. You know that about me. I know several things about you, Jae-min said. Some of them I learned tonight. Raymond looked at him for a moment. He set his glass down on the side table with a deliberateness that was itself a kind of performance, the gesture of a man demonstrating that he is not rushed. Minjun has been talking to you, he said. Minjun has been building a case. Minjun has been building a theory, Raymond said, and his voice changed, not louder, not colder, but more precise. The way a voice gets when a man decides to stop performing and start being accurate. A theory based on financial data he doesn't fully understand, interpreted by a 28-year-old who has never run a full operation without his brother holding one end of it. The transactions are documented. The transactions are complex. Complex isn't the same as criminal, Jae-min. I built the financial structure of this network. I have been moving things around inside it for 30 years. If your brother looks at my transfers and sees something that looks like skimming, that's because he's looking at maintenance and reading it as theft. The explanation was good. It was delivered well. It had the quality of something that had been prepared not for this exact moment, but for a moment like it, a moment that had been anticipated and planned for. Imani watched Sun-hee while Raymond spoke. She watched her mother-in-law's hands in her lap. The knuckles had relaxed slightly. This was not the relaxation of belief, it was the relaxation of relief. Sun-hee had heard this explanation already, or a version of it, and she had needed it to be true, and she had let herself believe it was true. Imani thought, she doesn't know. She genuinely doesn't know. She thought, and Raymond has been making sure of that. You were at the dinner tonight, Jae-min said. Raymond waited. You were sitting at that table when my family humiliated my wife on her birthday. His voice was still even, still the flat register, but there was something happening beneath it now. Something gathering, the way pressure gathers in a structure before the structure speaks about it. You laughed. It was a joke that got out of hand, Raymond said. You know, I've always respected Imani. Don't say her name. Raymond stopped. The room went very still. Don't use her name, Jae-min said. And now the register had changed, still not loud. But something in the frequency had shifted in the way that Imani had felt once for in this voice, and which she now understood, was the sound of a man who has released the part of himself that performs control and is now simply a person standing in a room dealing with the true thing. You sat at that table and you laughed at my wife. After months of managing what my mother and sister felt about her, feeding it, keeping it active, you sat there and you laughed. And then you called Lim. Raymond's face went neutral. Not guilty neutral. The face of a man running calculations. I don't know what Minjun told you. Lim documented his contacts, Jae-min said. All of them. Because Lim was not actually loyal to you. He was loyal to the documentation which he kept. Because he understood that the kind of man he was working with might someday need him to disappear, and he wanted insurance. He paused. You're in the documentation, Raymond. 16 calls over 8 months. Timestamps, durations. The call at 11:43 tonight, 12 minutes after we left this house, 4 minutes long. The calculation in Raymond's face completed itself. Something in the set of his features settled not into defeat, not yet, but into a different mode. The mode of a man who has lost one position and is already assessing the next one. What do you want? Raymond said. I want the accounts. Which accounts? Every account you've moved out of the network's reach in the last 8 months. The offshore structures, the intermediaries, the full chain. He paused. And I want to know who commissioned you. A beat of silence. Who commissioned me? Raymond repeated. You've been building an exit. Men who build exits are being pushed or being paid. You haven't been pushed. You have no reason to run from this network. You've prospered from it for 30 years. Jae-min looked at him steadily. So someone is paying you to create the conditions for a hostile acquisition of the Northeast operation. I want to know who. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Sun-hee said, from the sofa. Very quietly, Raymond. He didn't look at her. Raymond, she said again, and her voice had changed. The composure was still there, but it was doing something different now. Not maintaining itself against an attack from outside, but cracking in a very specific place. A specific seam. The seam of a woman who is confronting the possibility that someone she trusted completely has been using her. He still didn't look at her. That was what answered her question. Not anything, he said. The fact that when she said his name, he did not look at her. You told me it was for the family, she said. You told me you were protecting the Kwon legacy. That the boys... She stopped, and the word boy was how she had always referred to Jae-min when she was talking about him rather than to him. The habit of a mother who had never fully made the transition from the child she had raised to the man he had become, that the boy was making mistakes with that woman, that he was compromising the family's position. Sun-hee, Raymond said. You used my concerns, she said, and her voice had a quality Imani had never heard in it before, raw in a way that no amount of composure could cover, the sound of someone understanding in real time that they have been a tool in someone else's hand. You took what I told you about Imani. What I told you in confidence. And I protected this family's interests, Raymond said. His voice had shifted again harder now, the negotiation mode abandoned. Your son has been compromised since the day he married a woman with connections to a man who has been feeding information to our competitors for 3 years. The room stopped. Imani felt the stop. She felt it in her chest, in the base of her throat, in the specific physical sensation of something dropping away from, beneath a surface, you thought was solid. What did you say? Jae-min said. Raymond looked at him. The smile was gone. Derek Whitaker has been selling information about your network to the park organization in Seoul for 3 years. That is not a theory, that is documented. I have the documentation. He paused. Your wife's cousin has been an active intelligence source against you, since before you knew he existed. The silence was absolute. I know about Derek, Jae-min said carefully. Then you know that the connection runs through Atlanta, and the Atlanta connection runs through. Raymond paused, the specific pause of a man choosing his words, not for truth, but for effect, through people Imani Whitaker knew before she knew you. Imani said, that's a lie. Raymond looked at her. He had not looked at her directly since they entered the room. The look he gave her now was the look she had felt at the dinner table, from other angles the look of assessment, of a thing being measured for its usefulness. You grew up with Derek Whitaker, Raymond said. He's my second cousin. I haven't spoken to him in 6 years. But you knew him. You knew him well enough that when the connection is traced... Say the full sentence, Imani said. He paused. Say the full sentence, she said again, and her voice was steady, and Jae-min recognized as the voice she had used at the dinner table The stillness that came not from the absence of feeling, but from the decision to not let the feeling be used. You're implying I had something to do with what Derek did. Say it directly. Raymond looked at her for a moment. I'm saying the connection exists, he said. I'm saying it can be presented in a way that raises questions. That's not the same as saying it's true. In the right rooms, Raymond said, it doesn't need to be true. The sentence sat in the air like something that had been taken out of a container. The threat behind it was completely clear, not the blunt threat of a man with nothing left, but the precise threat of a man who still has moves and wants you to know it. He had documentation. He had financial records that could be presented as evidence of whatever he chose to present them as. He had months of conversations with Sun-hee, who had told him things in confidence, who had perhaps said things about Imani that could be extracted from context and shaped. And he had the Derek connection, which was real and documented, even if Imani's role in it was non-existent, the raw material for a story that didn't need to be true to do damage. Jae-min crossed the room. He moved quickly, not running. But the transition from still to moving was sudden enough that Raymond's hand came off the armrest, and his body adjusted in the chair, the reflex of a man recalculating his physical position. Jae-min stopped 2 feet from him and looked down at him in the chair, and the angle of it, Raymond sitting and Jae-min standing, was not accidental. You built this over 8 months, Jae-min said. You've had 8 months to prepare what you just said to me, the documentation, the Derek narrative, the offshore accounts, the people downstairs in the staff quarters who aren't here for anyone's safety but yours. He paused. You've been preparing to walk out of this network and take pieces of it with you, and you needed a reason, something that looked like it was about the family's integrity rather than about your own interests. And you decided my wife was the reason. Raymond met his gaze. Your wife's connections. My wife's connections are her second cousin, who she hasn't spoken to in 6 years, and who I was already aware of before you decided to make him into a narrative. His voice was very quiet. You're going to give me the accounts. You're going to give me the accounts. You're going to give me the documentation, all of it, including in the real documentation, stuff you actually have rather than what you've manufactured. And you're going to tell me who commissioned the exit strategy. And if I don't, Jae-min said nothing for a moment. Your people downstairs, he said. They're employees. They work for whoever is paying them, and right now you're paying them. They're not loyal to you the way Min-jun is loyal to me. He paused. Min-jun is outside. Raymond's jaw moved. He's been here for 4 minutes, Jae-min said. He came in through the east entrance with 3 people who have worked for this family for 20 years and who know the difference between the Kwon family and a man who has been systematically stealing from it. He watched Raymond's face. Your people downstairs are having a conversation right now about whether to stay or to take the exit that's being offered to them in exchange for testimony. The color in Raymond's face changed. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for dramatic, but it changed. The specific shift of a man whose prepared position has just had its foundation removed. You didn't know about Min-jun, Raymond said. It was barely a question. Not until tonight. But you've been in this business for 30 years, and you know what Min-jun is: careful, patient, invisible when he wants to be. You assumed he was occupied in Seoul. Jae-min tilted his head slightly. He was 40 minutes away the entire time. Raymond looked at the door. Just looked at it, a reflex, quick, almost suppressed. But Imani saw it. Jae-min saw it. The calculation was visible. The door, the people downstairs who might no longer be his, Min-jun outside, the documentation that was supposed to be leverage becoming a liability if it was seized. The path that had looked clear an hour ago was closing from every direction simultaneously, and Raymond Kwon, who had spent 30 years being the man in the room who prepared for every contingency, was discovering that the contingency he had not prepared for was the specific combination of a brother who had worked in silence and a nephew who had come back from a hotel room at 5 in the morning instead of staying away until morning. He looked at Imani. She looked back at him. She was aware of herself very precisely standing, not sitting, which mattered, standing in this room which was not hers, and had never been hers, but which she was in regardless. With her mother's earrings in and her burgundy dress from a birthday dinner that had become something else entirely. She was tired in a way that went into her bones. She was also, underneath the tiredness, something she hadn't expected to be at this point in this night, calm. Not the performed stillness she had carried at the dinner table, Not the managed composure of 3 years of navigation. Something more actual than those, the specific calm of a person who has had everything they feared actually happen and has discovered that they are still standing. Tell him what he needs to know, she said to Raymond. Raymond looked at her. Not for me, she said. Not because I think you've ever had any reason to consider what's good for me, but because the alternative, she held his gaze, is worse than you've planned for. The fire had burned low. The room was cold in the way rooms get when the heat source is no longer doing its job, that ambient chill that comes in from the walls. Raymond's glass was on the side table. Sun-hee had not moved from the sofa. She was sitting with her hands still in her lap, and she was looking at her brother-in-law with an expression that Imani would remember for a long time afterward. Not rage, not grief. Something more complicated than either. The look of a woman who has just understood the shape of how she was used and is deciding, in real time, what to do with that understanding. Raymond reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Every person in the room registered the movement. Jae-min went still, in a specific way, not tense, not preparing to move, just absolutely still, the stillness of complete readiness. Imani's heart hit 3 hard beats against her ribs. Raymond produced a phone. He placed it on the side table. The accounts are in an encrypted file, he said. The access code is a 12-digit sequence. I'm the only one who knows. He looked at Jae-min. The question of who commissioned the exit strategy. He stopped. Say the name, Jae-min said. Raymond looked at the phone on the table. He looked at the door. He looked at Jae-min, and for the first time all night, his face had something in it that was neither performance nor calculation, something older and more genuine. The face of a man, at the exact moment when he understands that the position he has spent years building has finally completely run out of ground. He said the name. And Jae-min Kwon, who had stood in a hallway 2 hours ago and heard his family humiliate his wife and kept his face completely still, who had driven through the Manhattan night and sat in a hotel suite assembling the shape of a betrayal that went deeper than any single room, who had walked into his mother's sitting room and faced down the man who had spent 8 months engineering the destruction of everything he had built. Jae-min closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them. He picked up the phone from the side table. Stand up, he said to Raymond. Raymond stood. The door opened. Minjun Kwon came through it, and he looked at his brother, and something passed between them that needed no words, the specific communication of 2 men who have spent a lifetime learning each other's silences, and Minjun stepped to the side of the door to make room for the men behind him. Raymond looked at the men behind him, and the last expression on Raymond Kwon's face, before the room reorganized itself into something that would take months to fully understand, was not the face of a man defeated by his enemies. It was the face of a man who recognized, in the last available moment, that the woman standing in the room whom he had spent 3 years treating as a vulnerability had been, the entire time, the one variable he had failed to account for. Not because she had done anything tactical or strategic or calculated, but because she had simply refused to leave, refused to break, refused to give anyone in any room the image of her on the floor, and that refusal had kept Jae-min Kwon coming home every night to a woman who made him want to protect something worth protecting, which had made him sharper and more present and more careful than Raymond's entire plan had accounted for. He had built his strategy around a weakness. The weakness had never existed. Sun-hee was on her feet. She was looking at her brother-in-law being walked toward the door, by men she had known for 20 years, and she was holding herself upright, the way she always held herself upright, but something in the holding had changed. It was not the posture of authority now, not the performance of a woman in command of her space. It was the posture of a woman who was still standing. Just standing. That was all. Jae-min looked at his mother across the room. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. And in the silence between them, Imani felt the full weight of what was still unresolved, not the business, not the network, not Raymond, or Derek, or the offshore accounts, or the name that had just been spoken in this room. All of that would take time and lawyers, and Minjun's careful documentation, and 100 decisions she would not be part of. That was not her war and had never been. What was still unresolved was the smaller, harder thing. The thing between a mother and a son, and the woman the son had chosen. The thing that would not be settled tonight or this week, or perhaps for a very long time. Sun-hee looked at Imani. Imani looked back at her. The fire was almost out. The room was very cold. And the night, which had begun with a birthday dinner, and a cleaning uniform, and 23 people's laughter, had arrived at a place that none of them, not Raymond with his 8 months of preparation, not Yuna with her phone and her ribbon, not Sun-hee with her 4-generation china and her careful contempt, had imagined it would reach. A place where nothing was finished, and everything, for the first time, was visible. The sitting room felt different after they took Raymond out. Not quieter, it was already quiet. But the quality of the quiet changed, the way a room changes, after a piece of furniture has been removed that you didn't know was load-bearing until it was gone. The space where Raymond had sat in Sun-hee's chair still held the shape of him. Somehow the indentation of the cushion, the glass on the side table with its half-inch of amber liquid, specific absence of a man who had occupied this family's orbit for 30 years and was now being walked out of it. Min-jun pulled the sitting room door closed behind him as he left. He did it quietly, which Imani understood was a courtesy, giving the 3 people remaining in the room the privacy of a closed door without making a production of it. Min-jun, she was realizing, was very good at the things that didn't make noise. She was standing near the window. Jae-min was standing near the door. Sun-hee was still on the sofa, and she had not moved since Raymond was walked out, and she was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the middle distance, with an expression that Imani had never seen on her face and could not fully name. The fire was nearly dead. Just embers now, orange and fading, giving off heat that barely reached past the fireplace itself. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Sun-hee said, "How long have you known?" She was looking at Jae-min. Her voice was different. Not the precision instrument it normally was, the tool she used to shape rooms and conversations. Just her voice, without the management behind it. Older somehow. About Raymond specifically since tonight, Jae-min said. About the broader structure of what he was doing. A matter of hours. And Min-jun, 3 weeks for him. He didn't tell me until tonight. Sun-hee absorbed this. He was protecting you. He was doing what he thought was right. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. He always was more careful than you, even as a boy. She paused. You were always the one who went toward the fire. Jae-min didn't respond to that. Sun-hee looked down at her hands. She turned them over once, palms up, then back down again. It was a small gesture, and it was, in some way Imani couldn't entirely articulate, the most human thing she had ever seen this woman do. He told me, Sun-hee said, that Imani's connections were a liability, that she had people in her background who were working against the family. She paused. I believed him, because you wanted to, Jae-min said. A silence, yes, Sun-hee said, because I wanted to. She said it without deflection, without the architecture of a justification around it. Just the plain admission, sitting in the room between them, like something that had been held underwater for a long time, and had finally come up. Imani looked at her mother-in-law, the woman who had handed her a cleaning uniform 12 hours ago, the woman who had told her she was nobody, the woman who had stood at a window watching their taillights and been, Imani had thought, a woman confronting a miscalculation. She had been right about that. She had underestimated the depth of it. You gave him the information he needed, Imani said. Sun-hee looked at her. About me. The things you told him, the conversations you had with him, about what you thought of me, what you believed I was doing to this family, he used that. He shaped what he was building around what you gave him. Sun-hee held her gaze. Yes. Did you know that's what he was doing with it? No. No pause before it. No, I did not know. Imani looked at her for a long time. She was trying to locate in herself the thing she felt about this answer. Not whether it was true, she believed it was true. She believed it in the specific way she believed. Things that came without performance behind them. But what she felt about a true thing could still be complicated. What she felt was this. It didn't make it smaller. The things Sun-hee had believed about her, the contempt that had built over 3 years into a cleaning uniform on a birthday table, none of that had been manufactured by Raymond. He had used what was already there. The material had been real. The things you believed about me, Imani said. Raymond didn't create those. No, Sun-hee said. You believed them before he got involved. Yes. So when we talk about what happened tonight, the dinner, the gift, all of it that wasn't Raymond. That was you. The room was very still. Sun-hee's jaw tightened. Not in the defensive way, in the way of a person swallowing something that tastes like what it is. Yes, she said. That was me. Jae-min moved. He walked from the door to the chair across from his mother, and he sat down in it, not the chair Raymond had occupied, the other one, the smaller one, that was usually left for guests. And he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at his mother the way he had looked at her across the dining room several hours ago, but differently now. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the hot thing it had been when he walked into the dining room. It had cooled into something heavier and harder to carry. I need to ask you something, he said. Sun-hee waited. Did you know what you were doing to her? Not the whole of it. I don't think you knew about Raymond. I believe that. But the 3 years of it. The things you said to her when I wasn't in the room. The photographs. The place settings. He paused. Did you know what you were doing? Sun-hee was quiet for a moment. A real moment of quiet, not a performative one. I knew it wasn't kind, she said finally. I told myself it was necessary. She paused. I told myself she was taking something from me. That you were... She stopped, and the stop had something raw at the edge of it, that I was losing you. That she had come in and changed who you were, and I couldn't find the version of you I recognized anymore. The version of me who was alone, Jae-min said. Sun-hee's eyes moved to his face. The version of me who came home to an empty apartment and funded everything and asked for nothing and was available at all hours because there was nothing else. His voice was even. That's the version you recognized. She didn't deny it. I wasn't happy, Amma, he said. I know you knew that. But I think it was easier to manage than this. Than me having something that wasn't part of the structure you built. That is not... She stopped. She started again. That is not all of it. Tell me the rest. She looked at Imani. She looked at her for a long moment, the same measuring look, but without the judgment behind it. Or the judgment was still there, but something else was in front of it now. Something that didn't have a name, but that Imani could feel across the room. She is not what I imagined for you, Sun-hee said. Not to Jae-min. To Imani directly. When I thought about the woman my son would marry, I had ideas. A specific set of ideas. About family and background, and she stopped. About what things should look like. I know, Imani said. I used those ideas as reasons, Sun-hee said. When the truth was simpler and less dignified than reasons. She paused. I was afraid of her. The sentence sat in the room. Of me, Imani said. Of what you meant. Of how completely he changed when you were there. She looked at her hands again. My son has a quality. He has always had it. He can be in a room and be entirely absent from it. Go through the motions of a meal, a conversation, a holiday, and you know the whole time that the actual person is somewhere else entirely, somewhere none of us can reach. She paused. He was like that for years. And then you arrived, and he stopped being absent. Her voice did something around the edges. I didn't know how to compete with that, so I tried to remove it. The fire was completely out now. Just dark ash and the faintest thread of heat. Jae-min was looking at his mother with an expression Imani had never seen on him. Not the controlled full face, not the operational face, not even the rare unguarded warmth. Something more painful than all of those. The expression of a person who is receiving a true thing from someone they love, and finding that true things, even the ones you needed to hear, carry a cost. You should have told me, he said. Any of it. All of it. What you were afraid of. What you were feeling, you should have come to me. Would you have listened? He was quiet. I would have tried, he said finally. You would have tried to fix it, she said. You always try to fix things. It's the same quality. A pause. I didn't want it fixed. I wanted it to be different than it was. Those aren't the same thing. Imani sat down. Not on the sofa beside Sun-hee in the chair near the window, the chair that faced both of them, that was neither aligned with one nor the other. She sat down because her legs were tired, and the night was long, and she was done standing in rooms trying to manage herself. She was just going to sit in this one. The broom, she said. Sun-hee looked at her. I need to ask you about the broom. Not the uniform, I understand the uniform. That's the version of this I've been receiving in smaller forms for 3 years. But the broom, she paused. That was Yuna's addition. That wasn't something you planned. Sun-hee was quiet a moment. No. But you didn't stop it. No. You watched her bring it out and you didn't stop it. No, Sun-hee said, and this time, the word had the quality of something she was not going to add anything to. Just the plain terrible weight of it. Imani nodded slowly. I need you to understand something, she said. Not for an apology, I'm not asking you for an apology tonight. This is not the right hour for apologies, and neither of us has the energy to mean one properly. But I need you to understand something, so that later, when we do talk about apologies, you understand what it is you're apologizing for. Sun-hee said nothing. She was listening. I was not trying to take him from you, Imani said. I was never in competition with you. I don't have that in me, not because I'm a saint, I'm not, but because the thing you were afraid I was doing is not a thing I've ever wanted to do to anyone. She held Sun-hee's gaze. What I wanted was to marry the man I loved and build a life with him. That's all. That's the entire scope of what I came into this family wanting. She paused. The fact that your son became happier after we married is not evidence of a conspiracy. It's just what happens when a person stops being alone. Sun-hee's eyes were bright, not crying, not quite, but the brightness of a person holding something back that has been building for longer than tonight. I know, she said. I don't think you knew it 3 years ago. No, Sun-hee said, I didn't. A long silence. I don't know what we are to each other, Imani said. After tonight. I genuinely don't know what's possible between us, or what either of us is willing to try for. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, because it isn't. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you, because I haven't gotten there yet, and I won't lie to you about it. Sun-hee received this without flinching. What I can tell you, Imani said, is that I'm still here. I'm sitting in your sitting room at 6 in the morning, and I'm still here, and I have not spent one moment of this night trying to use what happened against you. What I want, what I have always wanted, is for this family to be livable, not perfect. Livable. Sun-hee looked at her. That is a generous thing, she said, for a woman who was handed a cleaning uniform on her birthday. It's a practical thing, Imani said. He loves you. I love him. The math isn't complicated. Jae-min was looking at her. He was looking at her with the look she had seen on his face earlier in the night, the look from the hallway, the look that was deeper than the moment. The look that she understood now was the one she would see on his face in the good versions of the years ahead. The look of a man who sees his wife clearly. Sun-hee looked between them. She looked for a long time. Then she reached up and pressed the back of one hand briefly to her mouth, a gesture so private and unguarded that it felt like something they shouldn't be seeing. And she lowered it. And she straightened her spine. And she said, to Jae-min, I owe her more than she's asking for. Yes, Jae-min said. You do, I'm aware. She paused. I don't know yet what I'm capable of. At my age, with the way I've been, she stopped. I'm not going to make promises I don't know if I can keep. What I can tell you is that I understand, this morning, that I have been wrong. About her, about what I was doing, about Raymond and what I gave him. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing her something. I understand that. That's a start, Jae-min said. It's a very small start, yes, he said it is. They left the estate at 6:30. Min-jun met them in the entrance hall as they came out of the sitting room. He looked at his brother, the way brothers look at each other when something enormous has passed through a shared space, and left them both on the other side of it, not relief exactly, and not triumph, but the particular sober recognition of men who understand the cost of what just happened. Raymond's people confirmed, Min-jun said, keeping his voice low. 3 of the 4 gave statements. The 4th needs more time. What about the name he gave me, Jae-min said. Min-jun's expression tightened fractionally. We're working on it. It's going to be a process. How long? Weeks, maybe longer. This isn't a door you open quickly. He paused. It's a door you have to be sure about before you open. Jae-min nodded. Min-jun looked at Imani. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she didn't entirely know how to read. Not warm, not cold. The careful, measured regard of a man who is still in a process of forming a view. Then he said, I should have told him sooner about what I was investigating. If I had, you would have moved too fast, Imani said. You told him that yourself. You were right. Min-jun looked at her steadily. The Derek connection was clean on your end. I want you to know that I verified it completely before tonight. There was nothing. I know, she said. I know there was nothing. It's fine. It's not fine, he said. The fact that it had to be verified. Min-jun. She looked at him. We're all tired. Let's get to a point where we can think clearly, and then we can decide what's fine and what isn't. He was quiet a moment. Then something in his face shifted just slightly. Just enough. Yes, he said. All right, he looked at his brother. They did the thing again, the silent communication, the compressed exchange of men who had spent a lifetime building a shared language out of necessity, and then Minjun stepped aside and let them pass. At the door, Jae-min paused. He turned and looked back at the entrance hall, the chandeliers still burning, the flowers still pushed to the side, the family portraits on the staircase wall. He looked at them for a moment, the photographs, the 4 generations of Kwon faces, arranged in ascending order of the staircase. He looked at the 2 most recent ones, updated 18 months ago, both of them, and in both of them, Imani's absence was precise and total. He said to Minjun, without turning around, "I want new photographs taken. All of them updated. The whole staircase." Minjun said, "I'll arrange it. Before the end of the month, yes." Jae-min walked out. "In the car, going nowhere in particular, or going somewhere but not urgently, mister." Park drove and they sat in the back seat, and the October morning came fully up around them. The sky going from the gray blue of almost morning to the flat pale gold of early October sun. Imani was looking out the window. The trees along the Westchester roads had started turning the early ones, the maples showing the first red at their edges. The way fall always came to the northeast reluctantly, and then all at once. "Yuna," she said. Jae-min looked at her. "You haven't mentioned Yuna." He was quiet a moment. "No, what happens to her?" He looked out his own window. "The business accounts are still frozen. That stands." He paused. "She called Lim. She knew what Lim was, at least partially, and she used it. That's not something I can—" He stopped. "She's my sister. But what she did tonight, and what she chose to do with Lim, those have consequences. She'll have to rebuild without the network's support. Her business can survive that if she's willing to do the work. And if she's not, then it doesn't survive. That's her choice to make." Imani nodded slowly. "She'll be angry for a while." "Yes. She'll want someone to be the reason. She'll want it to be me. She can want whatever she wants," he said. "It doesn't make it true." Imani looked at him. "I'm not afraid of her. I know you're not. I just want to be clear that my position on Yuna is not about fear. It's about I don't have a word for it. The requirement that a thing be named correctly." He looked at her. "What thing? What she did, what she was part of. I don't need her to apologize on her knees. I don't need her destroyed. But I need her to say clearly, someday to my face, that she knew what she was doing and she did it anyway. Not a justified version of it. Not a version where I was the problem she was responding to." She paused. "Just the plain thing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll make sure she knows that's what's required. Not from you, from her. I understand." She looked back out the window. "When she's ready, not before." They drove through the morning. The city was still 40 minutes away, but she could feel it pulling, the way cities pull at you when you've lived in them long enough that they become the orientation your body uses. "True north. The name Raymond gave you," she said. Jae-min was still. "You're not going to tell me who it was." "Not yet." She thought about that. She thought about what it meant for someone to have commissioned Raymond to destabilize the network, the level of reach that required the resources, the patience of 8 months of careful preparation. She thought about what Jae-min was going to have to do about it, and how long it was going to take, and what it was going to cost him. And she thought about the fact that she was the wife of a man, for whom these costs were simply the landscape of living. She had known that when she married him. She had known it the way you know a thing you haven't fully tested yet. Now she had tested it. "Whatever it is," she said. "Whatever it requires. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her. "I know you keep hearing me say that," she said. "I need you to actually believe it this time. Not as a comfort, as a fact." He reached over and took her hand. Not the dramatic version of it, just his hand over hers, on the seat between them the same way it had been in the car going toward Westchester in the dark. The same warmth, the same certainty. "I believe you," he said. She turned her hand over and held his back. "I want to go to the house," she said. He looked at her, "The Hudson house. I want to see it." She paused. "I know it's 6:30 in the morning and we haven't slept, and the world is—" She gestured with her free hand at the general shape of everything currently, what it currently is. "But I have a key to a house, and I want to see what I'm holding a key to." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Mr. Park." "Sir, change of direction." "The Hudson property." A pause. "Yes, sir." The car made a smooth turn, and they headed west. The house was visible from the road, before the driveway, or the shape of it was visible. The roofline and the chimneys and the way it sat on its land with the particular settled authority of buildings that have been in one place long enough to look like they grew there. The Hudson's behind it, wide and pewter-colored in the morning light, and the property's trees were full-on autumn now, red and orange, and the last stubborn green, and the whole picture of it in the early morning was, Imani thought, almost unreasonably beautiful. Mr. Park stopped at the gate. Imani used the key on the gate lock. It worked, the gate swinging inward with the slight heaviness of something solid, and they went up the drive. The house was empty. No staff yet, no furniture, beyond what had been left by the previous owners, some pieces in the main rooms, covered in white cloths, giving the interior the quality of a room caught between states. But the ceilings were high, and the floors were old wood, and the light came through the windows in long morning angles that fell across the covered shapes and turned them gold. She walked through it without rushing. Jae-min walked beside her, slightly behind, letting her set the pace. She went through the front rooms and the main hall and the rooms off the main hall, and then she found the kitchen, faced west. Not the river, not yet. But the window at the far end of the kitchen faced a slope of land that ran down toward the water, and, in the morning light, she could see the gleam of the Hudson at the bottom of it, through the last of the trees. "It's not exactly a river view," she said. "We can put one in," he said. "You said that last night." "It's still true." She stood in the kitchen. The morning light was coming through even the west-facing window, ambient and pale, filling the room with the kind of light that makes spaces look larger than they are. She put her hand flat on the kitchen counter, cold stone, slightly rough, real, and she stood there with her hand on the counter, and she thought about all of it, not the whole of it. You couldn't hold the whole of it at once, but pieces of it, the dinner table and the uniform, the hallway and Jae-min's footsteps, the hotel suite at 3 in the morning, and Raymond in his borrowed chair. Sun-hee's hands turned palms up in her lap, the broom with the red ribbon, which was somewhere in the estate still, which she had not thought about since leaving it on the table. She thought about the 3 years of it. Not with the accumulation of injury, she was too tired for that tonight, but with the specific recognition of someone who has carried something a long distance and has finally set it down and is noticing the way her shoulders feel differently now. She thought, "I'm still standing." She thought that was always going to be the thing. Not winning, not being vindicated, just still being here, still upright, still myself. She had not lost herself. In 3 years of this family and their regard and their cruelties and their photographs without her in them, she had not lost herself. She had bent, she had adjusted, she had made herself small in ways she was not proud of. But the core of the thing, the actual Imani Whitaker, who had been born at 5 in the morning and had moved to New York alone and had built something with her hands and had loved a man who left notes on pillows, that person was still precisely where she had always been. Jae-min was watching her from the kitchen doorway. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking about the broom," she said. He was quiet. "I don't want it destroyed," she said. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. She thought about it. I want to put it somewhere I can see it. Not as a trophy. Not as a reminder of them." She paused. "As a reminder that I didn't pick it up." He looked at her for a moment. "I'll have it brought here." "Eventually," she said. "When we've actually moved in." "Yes." She took her hand off the counter. She turned around and looked at the kitchen, the high ceiling, the old fixtures that would need updating, the window with its partial river view, and she thought about what it would look like in a year. With the right light, with their things in it, with the window Jae-min was going to put in that faced the water directly, with a birthday cake on the counter. That small thought arrived quietly, and she let it sit. "You owe me a birthday," she said. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, relief, maybe, or specific expression of a man who has spent all night inside something enormous and has just been handed the smallest and truest version of what comes next. "I know," he said, "a real one. Not tonight, tonight is already over, and I intend to sleep for approximately a decade. But when I've recovered, a real dinner. Small. Just you and me and maybe," she paused, "maybe your brother. I think I'd like to know Minjin better." "He'd like that too," Jae-min said. "He's just bad at saying things like that." "Family trait," she said. He accepted that. Yes, she walked toward him across the kitchen. She stopped in front of him, and she looked up at him. He was taller than her, by enough that looking up was always a genuine thing. not a performed one, and she looked at his face in the morning light of this house that was hers, and she thought about the note she had found on his pillow that morning. Don't rush this morning. I made arrangements. He had made arrangements. He had spent months quietly, privately, building her something that could not be taken from her. Not because he knew what was coming, not because he had calculated it as a defensive move, because he had loved her and wanted to give her something permanent, and hers, something that existed outside the network and the family and the whole complicated machinery of the life he had built. He had done it on a random Tuesday in October, because it was her birthday and he wanted to. That was the man she had married. I love you, she said. The words sat simply in the morning kitchen air, not weighted with the night, not qualified by exhaustion or context. Just the plain thing. He put his hand against her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. Careful, the way he touched things that mattered. I love you, he said. I'm sorry it took me 3 years to see what was happening in my own house. You were watching the wrong things. I won't make that mistake again. I know, she said. I know you won't. She leaned her head against his chest. He put his arms around her, and she felt the solid fact of him warm, present, actually there, and she closed her eyes and let the exhaustion of the night move through her without fighting it. Outside the kitchen window, the Hudson caught the morning light and threw it back. 3 months later, the Kwon family's staircase at the Westchester estate had new photographs, all of them updated, the whole sequence from the first generation to the present. Sun-hee had been present for the photography session, which had taken an afternoon, and she had stood beside Imani for 2 of the photographs, and she had not made a single comment about either of them. It wasn't warmth. Imani did not expect warmth, not yet, not on any schedule. What it was presence, Sun-hee showing up, standing in the frame, and not making it a performance of difficulty, just doing it. That was the shape of where they were, and it was more than Imani had expected 3 months ago, and less than what might be possible eventually. And she was finding that she could live in that middle space without it costing her the way it used to. Yuna was not in the photographs. She had not been at the session. She was in the process of what she was, in the process of the business rebuilt from a smaller foundation, the accounting of her choices settling around her. Like weather, you can't talk your way out of, and she had not yet come to Imani with the plain version of what she had done. That remained unfinished. Imani was not rushing it. Some things you wait for, some things you don't chase down, because the chasing changes what you get when you catch it. The Derek situation had been resolved through Minjun's careful documentation and a series of conversations that Imani was not part of and did not ask about in detail. Derek Whitaker had been directed, through channels she didn't need to know, to understand the dimensions of what he had done and what continuing it would cost him. He had understood. She did not expect to hear from him again. The name Raymond had given Jae-min name at the end of the commissioned exit strategy that was still being worked. Min-jun was methodical about it, in the way he was methodical about everything, building the case from the inside out, and Jae-min had learned in the months following that night to let his brother work without interfering with the pace of it. This had not been easy for a man whose instinct was toward fire, but he was doing it. They moved into the Hudson house in November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The kitchen had its window by then. An architect had come, measurements had been taken, the wall had been opened and rebuilt, and the new window faced the river directly so that, standing at the kitchen counter on a clear morning, you could see the water from bank to bank, gray and wide and constant, moving south the way it had always moved. Imani stood at that window the first morning in the house and held her coffee in both hands and looked out at the Hudson and thought about nothing in particular for a full 5 minutes. Just the water, just the light. The broom was in the hallway. Not on display, there was no case, no spotlight, nothing theatrical about it. It hung on a simple hook at the end of the private hallway off the kitchen, the hallway that led to the back of the house, where nobody visited, where the rooms were less arranged and more lived in. The red ribbon was still on the handle. She had not removed it. She had thought about what she'd told Jae-min that morning, in the estate kitchen as a reminder that I didn't pick it up, and she had found, when the broom actually arrived, and she held it and thought about where to put it, that the meaning was more nuanced than she'd been able to articulate at 6 in the morning on no sleep. It wasn't about not picking it up. It was about the choice, the years of choice. Every morning she had woken up in a life that was trying to make her smaller, And she had chosen, daily, sometimes barely, sometimes with more difficulty than anyone had seen, to remain the full size of herself. She had not always done it gracefully. There had been nights, many of them, where she had sat alone in the apartment and been less than sure she could keep going. There had been moments where the management of it had made her less present with Jae-min than she wanted to be, smaller with herself than she could afford. She had not been a perfect person navigating this. She had been a real one. That was what the broom was for. Not victory. Not evidence. Just the reminder that being real, in conditions designed to reduce you, was its own form of resistance, the kind that didn't make noise, didn't need an audience, and it didn't require an enemy to acknowledge it to be true. She was real. She had stayed real. That was enough. On a Thursday evening in late November, Jae-min came home and found her in the kitchen with flour on her hands, making something she'd been meaning to make for weeks. A recipe her grandmother had written down in the cramped handwriting of a woman who assumed she'd be around to explain the parts she'd left out. She was working from memory and from the notes and from the specific knowledge that it wasn't going to come out the same, and making it anyway. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the estate kitchen. The morning after that look, the clear one, and he said, "Smells good. It's going to be wrong," she said. Grandma always added something she never wrote down. "I think it was nutmeg, but I'm not certain. Try nutmeg." I already did. It might be too much now. We'll see. He came in and sat at the kitchen counter, and she passed him a wooden spoon to stir something that didn't need stirring, and he stirred it anyway, which was the kind of purposeless, useful thing people do in kitchens, when they want to be present without being in the way. And she worked beside him in the good warmth of the kitchen, with the river dark and wide outside the new window, and the house settling around them in the particular way of houses that are becoming homes. Min Jun came for dinner. He ate 3 portions and complimented the biscuit specifically, and she thought, there is a person here I'm going to know better. They sat at the kitchen table after, the 3 of them, with tea going cold and the remains of dinner between them. And Min Jun said something about a logistics problem in Seoul. And Jae-min said something back, and she listened to them talk the way she'd never quite been in the right position to listen before. Not at the edge of something, not translating the conversation for content she was allowed to receive. Just listening. Just in the room. She thought about Sun-hee, about the sitting room and the hands turned palms up, about the photographs on the staircase, about the long work of 2 people finding something livable between them after years of something that wasn't. She thought, it will take as long as it takes. She thought, I can wait for things that are worth waiting for. The October night of her birthday, the uniform, the broom, Raymond in the chair, Sun-hee at the window, the hotel suite, the name spoken at dawn, the Hudson house, the first thin light, she could still feel all of it, clearly, the way you can still feel weather that has passed through. It was not gone. She was not the person who woke up that birthday morning anymore. Not exactly. You don't go through a thing like that and come out the same shape. But you come out. She had come out. Outside the kitchen window, the river moved south, dark and steady, the same water it had always been, carrying what it carried, moving where it moved, not asking on permission and not apologizing for its direction. Jae-min looked at her across the table. She looked back at him. She picked up her tea. It was cold. She drank it anyway.